a lot of that is just the naming of the different districts, the use districts. Again, doing some map amendments to be consistent with the general plan, and then also some map updates in terms of the land use diagram and noise corridors.
So in that cleaning up, it came as a surprise to me that the gateway mixed-use corridors no longer allow medical services or hospital. That was never discussed in the general plan.
I would have to defer to.
We can talk about that offline too, like that's gonna potentially derail your discussion today. There was some confusion from the hospital on their zoning, and they're not nearly as concerned as they were, a couple weeks ago. They just didn't understand what they were zoned.
They're public facilities.
Yeah.
Not.
Steffi, I'll say what they can't. It was a hairy problem.
Interesting.
So moving on, the question came up about form-based code. So form-based code, the code that we have been working through has been what's referred to as Euclidean zoning. So Euclidean zoning has a use table which has the list of uses, and those are tied to different districts. Form-based code has 5 main elements. There's a regulating plan, similar to what you see in the general plan where you have uses. It identifies where that form-based code either is applicable within a different, your overall regulating land uses, or it could be community-wide. That regulating plan also generally identifies where the different building form standards apply, but it goes by building form versus uses. But it does care about uses, so I think that's something to consider as you're thinking about form-based code.
Cares about what uses?
It cares about what type of uses are there. So it is thinking about residential uses, about building uses, and mixed uses as well, but it's thinking about it from form. So it has the regulating plan, which for most of us familiar with planning, that looks a little like a zoning map or a land use plan. It also comes with public standards, so these would be standards for your public realm elements, so standards for your streetscape, standard for your sidewalks, that right-of-way pieces, and then it comes with building standards. So your awnings, your building size, the form and mass and setbacks, they usually have build to lines. I'll show you in the next diagram instead of setbacks. It also comes with, similar to a zoning or development code, where you have your administrative guidelines and then the glossary or your definitions.
Could you tell me again what the difference is? It sounds pretty much like
It is very similar at its core, but the idea is really that it's about form over use, but it does care about uses. But there's a lot within a form-based code at its base nature has those set of design guidelines, which a regular code does not have to have a set of design guidelines.
Design guidelines?
Yeah, a regular code can just be the codes and uses, the setbacks, parking requirements, building heights,
Yes.
massing. It doesn't have to have a set of design guidelines or design standards with it. Form-based code has that baked into it.
Is it accurate to say that in the town of Truckee, we already have some form-based code in the sense that we're going above and beyond like just uses, right? I mean, that there are some
Height restrictions, there are.
Yeah, there are I'm thinking about the Jaboom Street building. There were quite a few conditions on that sounds like it slops over into form.
A little bit. The design guidelines piece is the biggest piece, where you connect with the form of form-based code. And not just the building heights, because that would come with development code regardless of design standards.
Right, but there were design guidelines for the building.
Yeah, and a lot of planned developments, Jorger has a set of, more rigorous design standards and codes that come with it, or guidelines that come with it as well.
And you would find those also in form-based.
And you would find those in form-based. Some of the things that are different, if you look at this slide, is that it really relies a lot more heavily on some graphics and tables and illustrations to help describe what is the intent of the built form of the code versus a use table. has built 2 lines versus setbacks. Again, it's primarily used or intended to be used where you're really focusing on walkability, so they want to create this urban form that's a very walkable form. It has, you know, some varying building facades, but it's, you know, we want to build things to a line versus trying to set them back, which is a little bit more residential.
Stephanie, a question for you. So I did some research on the pros and cons of form-based, and the concerns with form-based are pretty specific. And in your experience, have you experienced some of those issues with mismatched conditions and, you know, incorrect and/or usage causing a logic loop back that makes it really difficult for the property owner? Have you experienced any of those?
I would say I've been coordinating with some of our other team members who do have a bit more specific experience with form-based code. Her daughter's in the Nutcracker this week, so she's so she was like at the joint. Priorities.
Yes.
But I had discussed the same things with her. There's some
Okay.
great benefits to it,
Mhm.
but it does, if you go to, let me just flip through this next code. This is sort of like a, you know, if you think about approaches to zoning, you can have first adding graphics at a basic to your use-based code, so you understand we're talking apples to apples a little bit more. You can add design guidelines to your use-based code. That again gives people a little bit more sense of like what we're trying to achieve and what the look of it wants to be. Adding the mixed-use zoning adds greater flexibility about different uses on the same parcels. And then you can move, you know, as you go into 4, 5, 6, you can reorganize the code, which the town is currently doing some minor updates. And then you can go into a little bit more complex changes, which is incorporating form-based codes within specific areas with like an overlay. I'm just gonna say it's only for the downtown area and this is my form-based, or you can do the entire piece as a form-based. And there are challenges, especially if you have an overlay of one area, then you're requiring people to understand 2 types of zoning and development and planning, and your planning commission and your town council to also understand there's 2 different types of development structures and code structures.
I was talking with a developer today in Sacramento, and he is very opposed to form-based because of that.
And it can, I've heard feedback that developers feel like, oh, well, then it's more subjective for a plan reviewer to say,
Yes.
well, before I could say it met X, Y, Z, and now I'm looking at the form, and does that really meet the intent? And it's a little bit more guideline-based. So I've heard pros and cons.
Yes.
So I also looked up pros and cons. One of the other cons on it was that it is not as flexible. Maybe that's why a developer wouldn't be as interested if it's not flexible.
I think it depends on what you want to get out of it. Like, some people do feel it's flexible because it's a little bit more about the form and not as based on the use, although it does still care about the use.
Well,
So I
form,
think-
form makes it, if you're designating form, it doesn't seem flexible.
Yeah, it could be a little bit harder because you're like locking into a building form versus.
I think it's
Yeah.
really interesting for us to learn more about it and talk about it. But as a committee, I'd hate for us to spend a year going down one road and then have to divert a path. That might make things much more difficult.
I was reflecting on it too, like how did we get here? What happened at
Yes.
our last steering committee meeting that we got here today?
Yes.
And so, as you remember, we were looking at surveys that we had completed where we had said for, I'm not gonna have the vocabulary right, but for area 1, the west end of our study area, here's a list of all these different kinds of uses. Which do we want to allow in this study area? And then we did that exercise for 5 different areas.
Mhm.
And that was reflected back to us at the steering committee meeting, and we were all like, whoa. And it was starting to feel arbitrary to us, right? We're like, well, area 1 got so many votes for these kinds of uses, and area 2 got so many votes for these kinds of uses, right? So it started to become overwhelming, and there was a thread, I don't want to say it was even a theme necessarily, but a thread that it was a little bit arbitrary. And as we discussed that as a steering committee, I think it was Jan Zabriskie that said, you know, are we kind of barking up the wrong tree here with such a focus on uses is what we're more interested in, the form or the look of what's happening in our study area. So, and again, I think we even acknowledged in that meeting that it was risky to think that form-based codes were gonna fix that problem that we were experiencing. But it was an opportunity for us to explore some strategies, because we were, just what I'm repeating myself now, it just was a little like, whoa, how come, these 50 uses can go here, but they can't go here, or only 30 of the 50 can go here, right? There wasn't enough rationale for us.
And there's so many uses, yet it's still not even close to complete.
Right,
Right.
that problem as well.
Right.
Yeah.
And so we were
Yes.
running into a problem of how do we get the superset of uses, and then how do we vote on them?
Yeah.
Wow.
Well,
I
and then-
think that Jan, my notes show that Jan said, I think we should look at a form-based code and evaluate it. And so most of us had no clue what that was.
Yeah.
And so he was trying to problem solve, I think, in a positive way.
Mm-hmm.
But what
Mhm.
then happened is it diverts us dealing with the real issue.
Yeah, which is, because what we've heard is flexibility, right?
Yes.
And going to the mixed use does allow some flexibility. But I
Yes.
think, I don't want to go too far, because
Yeah.
I know this is, I think, a discussion for the larger group,
Mhm.
about, again, what wants to be included? What does that look like for
Mhm.
this reporter about where we're going?
Thank you for answering that question.
I think the challenge is in some cases, and beyond your property might be a good example of that, where buildings are there, can they be repurposed, and are we more concerned with the structures and how they're gonna look versus what's being done inside of them? Where form-based might be something that is a solution in that case, and provide him the flexibility for uses, but give the community a comfort in terms of the outside. But that's such an individual property-based determination if it's flexible, and what does that flexibility? It's not flexible for every property that is gonna demolish and start new, they lose a lot of flexibility, or some with the form-based.
You're saying that isn't flexible?
I think that's what Pam's
Yeah.
hearing from her developer, because they then are designing something and they don't have a clear
Yeah.
box that's not subjective.
What this developer said is it's very loosey-goosey, and that having developed for almost 40 years, they will never engage in a property where a town or any element is form-based, because it can switch and change, and you don't know what your costs are.
Well, I mean, I could see both problems. One, you don't want the whole corridor to look exactly the same.
Right.
Which form-based could lead you down that path.
Right.
And the other being that over time, things will change, and you want it to be adaptable.
Mhm.
So I can see, you could have both sides where, but to me, in a community, you should have all ranges of design, all ages of design,
Yes.
and things, character.
I mean, I think the reality, though, is that we're not looking at regular code and form-based code. I mean, I'd be curious to know, like, what we already have in the development code that's driving some developers crazy already. But, it seems like there's still a lot of developers saying, well, I can't do this because I'm supposed to put, make it Truckee Funk. And I'm like, where's Truckee Funk in the development code? I can't find it. Like, and I may be wrong, because I could probably, it could be.
And what that means, I think that's
Yeah.
where, if you look at this sort of 1 through 6 as the spectrum, like, getting, there's a little bit of being able to add some flexibility, and also some ability for people to easily understand about what's intended. That little bullet to the side, the Unified Development Code, is a strategy that some communities use that sort of bubble up guidelines and your regulatory code, your code table, all in one. So it's a bit more graphic, but it still is essentially, a more traditional type of zoning versus the form-based code.
So.
But it takes a bit of work to get there
It's-
too,
it's-
to be able to grab.
Yeah, so I think last meeting when this came up, I felt that was a real dogleg in all of this. And now, this is something the whole group should discuss, but this is gonna be a time suck, getting, this kind of zoning in place.
Well, I don't know that,
I mean, you have to go through a whole new, new guidelines, new, decisions, and form-based will require some time. No question about it, and it could.
if we as a group decide to pursue form-based.
I'm just saying.
I don't
Right, I
think
was gonna
that
say, we
decision's
have
been
to
made.
agree to that.
Well,
Right.
I'm saying this is for the whole group to decide.
Yeah.
I'm just
Yes.
pointing out that I see it as something that's going to delay. And it may be a panacea for us, but it is going to be a delay, no question.
Well,
Well, I don't know if we have to,
yeah,
I think it's, the question is how we bring, provide the information to the rest of the
Yes.
committees so that
Yes.
there can be a decision, do we wanna go down
Yes.
this further? Or are we okay, again, trying to understand, there is this opportunity for mixed-use zoning in this corridor, what does that mean? Because that gives the town the ability to say, as they're doing in other places, well, that's this mix of uses that we can envision being permitted in a way, so that as they move through there.
I'll just chime in. Stephanie, I think you're right to some degree that if we were to move toward a form-based zone for just this area of town, there would definitely be a learning curve, there would be more work that would need to be done than if we were to just use our typical way of zoning, but we still have to create an entirely new zone district for this whole stretch of Truckee.
Correct.
So regardless, there's still a huge amount of work that's gonna need to be done. I think if we just did form-based code, there'd be more. But regardless, there's gonna be a lot of effort that goes into whatever type of code we choose.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
no question.
I have two questions. One is exactly what the river protection overlay is, what is already in that is different than the rest of the community? So what requirements are already part of the river protection overlay?
There's some limited uses, or I would say uses are more limited, and there's some specific design and development standards that apply only to those properties.
And our thinking so far has been that that may go away and we may overlay a mixed-use district, is that correct?
Well,
Or kind of what's being proposed?
We haven't talked about whether or not the river protection overlay goes away. That could still remain over a mixed-use zoning.
Well, I think, so if it already limits some uses, we need to know what that is, right? We need to know what is already limiting in the river overlay, protection overlay. The other question is there a way to continue to have, I tried to write down the word, I'm gonna call it uses zoning because your word's right.
That's good, I like it.
But have it much less specific, have it much more broad. Because what I felt we got really bogged down in is, there were probably 10 different, maybe 20 different housing types. Which,
Yes.
like then it just becomes
Yes.
overwhelming. And if we're just trying to say housing, can we just say housing? And leave the specific type of housing to be decided at some future, like way down the road. Somebody wants to propose a different form of housing, that's something that the planning commission or they would take up at that level, but we wouldn't take it up at this level. And the same with other uses, just broaden categories out so that we can have zoning that's much more flexible, but still encompasses a use-based zoning.
So in other words, just housing,
Yeah,
What was that?
housing.
just housing.
Is the, just so I
We don't
understand.
wanna get into the details of multifamily, single-family homes.
Yeah, condos versus.
Condos.
Yeah.
When I read
Private
all
rental.
those things last time and I was reading them out loud to everyone, I mean, it's ludicrous.
It is.
You know,
Like, we could-
I'd just be maybe a slight, I wanna say I absolutely object to that, specifically with housing, but it's hard to think that it might end up all single-family housing.
Yeah.
Exactly.
We don't want
Hard.
that.
That came to mind, Joan.
Yeah.
That's one use.
We
that
definitely don't want
Would be
that.
a wasteful,
Yeah.
wasteful.
But I
Yeah.
don't want
Property.
9 different housing
Well, and my question is, does the housing element already prevent that from happening? Like, is
Maybe.
there another document that's already in
Yeah.
place that says,
What we're prevented from doing is down zoning in this, on certain properties in this area, unless we upzone in other areas.
What does
That's a
that
state
mean?
law.
How could it
going
be
to
down
a
zone? It's
easy-
as bad, it's a
less
bottom.
less
From a
density?
residential density, sorry.
Okay.
So a
So-
single family house doing,
1 unit per acre versus 10 units per acre.
Okay. That's down zoning?
You
You
can't go
from ten to
That's
one
left zone.
unless you find
9 other.
other spots to put that.
Oh.
In town.
That's because of the
State law.
RENA numbers, right?
That's right.
And
State law.
the state, we've already submitted to the state that there's gonna be a certain number of housing
We're
units
required
on
to
a
submit to
property.
We're required to submit to a certain number.
Agreed, and I would say that what Jenna just mentioned is what killed the co-housing project. Because we were proposing a 32-unit project on 2 acres, which is damn dense for Truckee. I mean, it's multifamily housing, it was like 3 stories, all the shit, sorry. It was like a dream project, but somehow it wasn't dense enough because the property's zoned 24 units to the acre. And I wonder if it was not the town's problem that, you know, like if we needed to find the housing unit somewhere else, is that the property developer's problem or is it the town's problem, right? Because, you know, ultimately, I think we proposed a dream project.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that group did not have more than $500,000 to waste,
Yeah.
you know.
I think the challenge with, the first thought I had when you said is that the town's problem is particularly now with state density bonus and the ability to just add on to so much, for the town to say to developer A, he wants to give you 8 units because he doesn't want to build out, she can take 8 units and now all of a sudden that's 16 in an area that might already be really dense to begin with. So one of the items in the general plan, I forget where, it's in the housing, but land use is to develop a
Yeah.
transfer development rights program that could pilot that and maybe come with some, I don't know if we can even put strings on it that says if you agree to take the 8, you can't double it with density bonus, right? And you two work out what you want to sell them to her for, tell her maybe put something on there about we have to agree to deed restrictions. I don't know, we don't have the program, but
Mhm.
that's where the town can maybe help solve the problem, but for us to identify a lot could be quite problematic. And that's the hospital's thing, right? Like find our
Yeah.
housing from Levon and put it somewhere else, or from MacGyver and put it somewhere else.
Yeah.
All the easy spots have been developed, so the spots left either have restrictions from a fire access perspective or
Right.
different zoning issues, like they're not, there's not a, you know, bright light out there that's like, this is where they belong and they fit there perfectly and it's, we'll just make that change.
For the action plan that the steering committee's gonna generate,
I know.
what, you know, I'm looking really at the 3 of you, maybe the 5 of you, from what's been progressing so far with the steering committee and your expectations and ideas about the quote-unquote finished product of the action plan. What level of detail of information do you feel would be most beneficial to come from the steering committee around zoning in the action plan? Is it literally defining mixed-use zoning? I mean, is that what the action plan needs, or does the action plan need to define, for example, some characteristics of what mixed use zoning would be? Like, what do you see that we need to be aiming at in the next 60 days?
I think what would be super helpful, and maybe Jenna even can weigh in on this from a planning perspective, but I don't think there's any expectation that collectively all 16 of you are gonna be able to say, this is all the allowed uses in this zoning district.
Yeah.
What would be helpful to hear is, we want housing, but we absolutely do not want all single family I don't want 10 definitions, I'm okay with multifamily apartments or
Right.
whatever, I just don't want all single family, and then we can take that back and say, how do we define that?
But to me, the committee has a huge opportunity here, including the community. This is a receiver site. We don't have other receiver sites
For housing.
for housing. I'm going back to the housing, your point, I was going to make it. It would be squandering property if we did single family. This community needs a place to put housing to meet state guidelines. And there are some places we have now by right stuck it where it's not necessarily appropriate. But if we're going to expand and find sites for housing, this is it. It's a dream site. And so I think this committee should think seriously about that and not squander that opportunity, because there aren't going to be a lot of other sites for us to work with for multifamily.
Does getting to what Jenna recommended in terms of the level of detail from this committee of not a lot of single family, we were trying to focus on multifamily, or no single family at all, like that level of detail being able to come from this committee enough to get at what you're saying? That
That's
you're not
what-
missing the opportunity, but allowing the town and staff to be able to dive into the nuances of, the complexity of the different zoning designations, which are needed to be able to, effectively administer and implement the general plan as well. Like, losing all of that detail would be challenging, but I don't think it's on this committee to have to understand it all.
So I think
No,
we
but-
take back what we hear, and then our next meeting is to come back and say, this is what we think we heard, this is what we came up with, how did we get it right, how did we get it wrong, what needs to be massaged more.
Mhm.
If we could get to that point, I think that would be successful.
Well, I think that also the thing we need to remember, and looking at sites for industrial that we've been doing, relocation, one of the problems we've run into is some of it's zoned housing that we'd like to use for industrial. So where can we put that, move that based on the state laws? And that's becoming very complex. Here we are. And as I say, this we really need to think out, because once we've zoned it, housing, we can't go backwards unless we have another site. We know we don't necessarily. Hard to find. So it's a big deal. The housing component is huge.
And do we know, based on the housing element, how many, like, it seems because of the last statement you made, that we don't want to over-zone for housing because we will be stuck with that zone
Right.
permanently. We actually want to zone for what we are required to zone for, and then allow flexibility on the other pieces of property.
Exactly. I think we need to think about what our needs are going to be for housing. And somewhere in the general plan that,
But if we zone it as housing, even
Yeah.
if, like, today we don't need it, yes, projected 20 years from now we need it. But we zone it for the 20-year in the
Correct.
future. It cannot be anything else,
Right.
ever.
right.
So it sits then.
That's why we need to think this out very thoughtfully, remembering how far behind in housing we are, how desperately in need we are of it, and that isn't going to go away.
But if we are general enough as a committee, and we talk about, we want now I'm making all this up, X amount of single-family homes and X amount of multifamily, and we want flexibility, and we don't want housing defined as those 10 different quadrants that we have to say how much. And we send it back to the town saying we do want flexibility. So that when there's a need, not if, when there's a need for additional housing, we could build additional housing, but leaving opportunities. Because if we build out both sides of West and East River Street with housing, we're gonna regret it.
Well, I'm not suggesting that. I think you're right, we need to really, this really requires some thinking. And the allowed uses, which is what you're talking about.
Right.
Still could be fairly broad,
Mhm.
but they need to, in my understanding of this, need to serve the ultimate need of how much housing, how much we do ultimately need. And it could be a mix, duplexes, multifamily, whatever it is we come up with.
I'm sorry, go.
No, go ahead, Liz.
I'm remembering the survey and the maps that we did before the
Mhm.
last meeting that we had, and I'm not remembering them perfectly. I think there were different, for lack of a better word, sort of different flavors or different types of mixed use that we were trying to get to. All of them included some complicated mix of housing options, which were hard for us to understand.
Mhm.
Right.
But maybe like a little bit what we're coming to here again is, it's not that we're competent to talk about form-based versus Euclidean,
Yeah,
Euclidean
it's a fun
versus
word.
Euclidean.
I was-
Competent to do that.
Is it
But,
Euclidean?
and nothing that we've seen
Yes.
today, which is totally fine, right? Nothing that we've seen today encourages us to hop on the form-based, right? That we haven't seen anything come forward with that. But maybe where we did get today is that we're back to what we covered at our last meeting with a new approach to it. How can we describe what these different kinds of mixed uses would be, including housing, but without the level of detail and complexity that we were talking about a month ago?
Yes.
I wonder if we have
Yes.
enough information at this point to take
Yeah.
the survey results and then the maps. I was thinking of the maps that you were referencing.
Yes.
And go back to staff and try
Yeah.
to massage
Yeah.
something that's not gonna be completely what you want, but it's a better starting point for the conversation.
I really love that idea, Jen, because I think staff can distill down what you all have heard us say for a year.
Yeah.
And be able to then present a draft, of here's the starting point.
I think my recollection from the maps, there was a lot of consistency amongst the 3 home groups.
Yes.
The one location that there was not really alignment was East River Street and the Pombo's property.
Mm.
I think there was an interest in housing or park and kind of a variety
Mhm.
there.
Yeah, so having that discrepancy reflected back to us.
Yes.
And so we can.
And then we can zero in and discuss that specifically.
Yes, and let us munch on that and give us a time frame, and then we make recommendations.
Okay. I think we can work towards that. We might have to give you a couple
Yeah.
at a time. but
Sure.
I think we can work towards that.
But then, again, I don't know exactly how this would work for our study group. Is there a way for this study group, if we agree to this even, to say to the larger group, wow, we just didn't really hear anything about form-based development codes that make us think we need to go down that path? Can we say that to the larger steering committee?
I think it's okay to say that. You can either say that as, if you want to see if you're consensus with that, as a representation of the group. If the group as a whole is not ready to say that, that's okay too.
That's true, we could just say it individually.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I do think you have to
Are we
give-
ready to say that? I certainly will say it.
If it
No matter what.
impedes development, investment, if it impedes investment,
Yes.
I would be very opposed to it.
Yeah.
Because we're not going to get anywhere with our dream here if we don't have investment.
Exactly.
And Angelo.
It's just
I'm s-
another layer of bureaucracy, is what I was
Different
told.
type of-
Yes.
You're
And
still gonna have to go
You
through
can't take
a
a formal
process.
vote with our
Right.
study session, so
Right.
it's really just opinion-based.
Yeah,
I would say you'd probably, do want to make sure, because we're recording this.
Yes.
Right, so that
Do you agree
people
with
that couldn't attend now can
Yeah.
listen to it. So you
Jan
probably
agrees with that.
Want to give people space to go back and watch it and develop that opinion or not on their own, but I think saying what you've heard, and I don't know if Jan feels the same or not.
Well, now, I apologize, we were in the peanut gallery and I missed what you were saying. I need both ears to hear you say.
You got moved too.
I was saying, I'm not sure if you agree that form-based is not something you're interested in pursuing, or if you'd rather pursue it, in terms of what this group has heard today, but in order for the rest of the group that couldn't attend, we should give them space to listen to the recording and hear what you had a chance to hear.
Sure, yeah, no, I'm happy to share. I guess if I end up repeating myself from this afternoon session, forgive me.
Is
That's
your
okay.
gut level not to support form-based going down that road?
Well, to me, it seems like
It's,
there's kind of a gray area
There was a
between
mistake.
form-based codes
And
and
it looks like we
Euclidean
put food
codes that
around
we're
5:20.
already,
Okay.
we're
Yeah.
already dealing with. And I think,
Already in there.
you know, what I believe that is relevant to our discussion is, well, maybe some, like, for example, outdoor storage. Well, maybe outdoor storage, which honestly is really critical for just about any contractor or, you know, a lot of things, right? I mean, some outdoor storage, or even retail, that there's certain form-based or certain standards,
Guidelines.
design guidelines that are gonna make people feel a little more comfortable. Oh yeah, I think it would be okay for there to be a pipe supply place if they didn't store their pallets right on West River Street and, you know, they, for example.
Yeah, they have
Or,
in a fenced yard, or, you know, like
Yeah.
some
And-
sort of guideline that allows that to occur.
yeah, and it could be that there's artwork on the fence, I don't know, you know, like, but yeah, you know, we don't wanna be driving down West River Street and looking at pallets stored on the sidewalk, you know.
And you don't want to be in a home that's in a multi-complex fourth floor, looking down into a fenced area with all of it. You can see that at Pioneer Center. It doesn't work.
Yeah,
So there's some things that have limitations to me, making everything work well.
Yeah, I mean, we will tee this up a little bit, but that is something that other communities are dealing with, and some finding ways to think through those noise nuisance pieces, because that's why form-based is still concerned with uses, is because of that noise.
Yeah.
Odors. It's a challenge that other communities are dealing with, trying to actually achieve housing, and trying to understand how we might, through some design guidelines and design, improved building design, address some of that, so you can mix those uses while still making sure it's a nice place to live.
Yeah.
And that a developer knows what's gonna be next door to them.
Yeah.
To be able to.
Cyril Mancuso said it was one of the biggest mistakes that they made there. Housing upstairs and industrial storage downstairs and uses. It's
Yeah.
not a pleasant place.
Developers are gonna have to know, as Stephanie
Right,
said,
figure
what's
out.
next, what's gonna be next door.
Yes, certainty.
And how it's zoned.
Certainty.
But my feeling on that is that it's not a nice neighborhood. Like, you want our housing to be neighborhoods. Our multifamily housing, whatever, they all should be neighborhoods.
Mhm.
And when you have a house above an industrial space, that's not a neighborhood.
No,
Totally agree.
absolutely.
Do not want that.
It's a place to live.
This is a good discussion.
A very good discussion.
So-
Ready for
I'm
we
glad
are,
I'm glad I came.
Did you get that down?
What?
Did somebody write that down?
Oh, you moved? I moved.
Been relocated.
We're
You're limping.
we're being required to make
Why are
new
you-
friends.
It's just an old deformity that needed addressing, so I had surgery last week, no big deal. Not an injury this time.
Okay, good. I was like, it was reported that there was no injuries from the
There were
last
no
event.
injuries. I know, I read that. I waited to share this till
Yeah.
after.
When I walked
Our
in, watched you
study,
walk
we
in, I
should
thought,
stop recording
how
our
could this
study.
be?
We are gonna recess.
Oh, okay, I'm a little late.
Well, we're gonna recess at 5:20, because that's when the food is gonna
So
come.
are you saying that?
The food's coming at 5:20?
Yeah.
Okay.
At the hospital, the zoning and, gateway areas.
I believe it's still allowed.
Yeah, I mean, what we went into,
They didn't understand.
It's the real.
it is real, and they're gonna come up in
We're not. I mean, this, they were.
But I worry about.
Eliminated what actually said mental services in the hospital, that's been deleted.
Yeah, their use is different. I can explain.
You certainly like it.
Oh, we're done.
find something else.
But we need to know.
In under public, yes. Yeah, we were just proposing to change in corridor mixed use, which is
Yeah, no, I mean, I think
A tank top.
have a coffee over that.
Can find the because that front piece just came right out last year. And what I don't like, but then everybody jumped on it. And what I don't like in projects like that,
And then my mom came up for
to be part of, is where we spent a lot of time making some progress. And then,
And I'm sure you allow it.
She was also very appreciative.
It's such a huge
Yeah, well, I mean, we all jump, I mean, I get it. You know, to me, it's very clear after looking at it.
I've talked to 4 developers who would be potential beings.
And especially with like recently,
She just got something to note on.
Exactly.
To discuss this,
reach out.
but yeah, I mean, I think we'll be. I still think that what happens in co-housing projects
So we think that they might have some minor concerns,
I mean, it's but the bottom line, there were,
I guess what's funny, we can still remember, right, like, it's really vivid, yeah.
I'm jealous.
I mean, it's not any one issue to hold it, but one of the most important ones was, I mean, I really should create a listing. Or maybe you should.
we're talking about this.
It's okay.
I could make a list.
But one is, and this solution and Andy saw the same problem, is that the town was pushing us to close
So the town was pushing a plan.
Andy and Alicia had the same problem. They were like, here's our project. We roughly want to do
Yes, they will not remember.
My sister was formed, so they like, they did.
Well, it's ridiculous from their perspective.
You know?
It is not possible and right. Change decisions by towns and cities. They just go off. But I also just think that's the case. No, that's why I say and then I looked up, but I don't want to, I think there's some concept with it. But for us to keep going down one path, then it just becomes one person who get out to no, you were absolutely right. Yes, but it's not getting here to fight the 20. Sorry, no food.
No. Let's take out the date. You're so funny.
That's the most
Good input.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, we were just doing
Awesome.
Yeah.
Nice. We should be okay.
I was telling them, I took a course on this,
Worst case environment. Yeah, we're gonna have a set of appetizers. I'm trying to split because in the light show in the background. I'm gonna have a little bit of support with the Italian ham.
I will.
I plan to.
Yeah, so,
I thought it was really interesting, but I thought.
Lots of talk and people want, oh, I want to, I want to. So, there's one in Denver. Both applications so far were this. I know. And Stephanie's been in touch with Ariel over here. How's it going? She's out of town.
Well, you're getting important now, so you get the head table.
Just so much overlap to me.
It's like I get to see anyone.
Anyway.
I hear ya. Did you have a good Thanksgiving?
Yeah, and I was told that
Go down and see the whole.
oh, good.
I got to see him.
Oh, that's so much better than
Yeah.
everybody else.
So, I got it. I forget what it says. Oh, wow. We've gotten applications from vendors.
Yeah, what are you doing way over there?
So we have, I don't know.
You're making us mingle.
I guess.
So
You
they,
stay in the same spot though.
I got here before they came out.
I emailed everybody.
But we're stuck.
I went down and emailed everyone I know that had contacted us. Even people who aren't in our targets, at least, if nothing else,
I use it all the time.
so like
Every day.
we're not looking at her property. But we love her to be aware. Let people know if she's not interested to tell us.
Hi, how are you guys? I'm on this side today. I like it.
Yeah, yeah.
Hands up. I know. I like your festiveness. I feel like you're very holiday ready.
Oh, yeah.
I had to go see clients and.
Oh, so yeah. Got it.
So I came home really quickly.
Put my Truckee clothes back on.
I'll forward you the email.
Feels like it's been a while since we were here. I know, but it just feels that way. Well, and I think maybe that's it, because we didn't have a second meeting this month. Thanksgiving, so it's been a while for me, yes. She's doing good, yeah, she's doing good. And she is gonna retire in March, so she's 70. She's very excited for that. I bet she is. So she'll have a lot of free time, so definitely will need to be hanging out.
Oh, that's nice.
Exactly, that's, she'll be excited. Yeah. She makes How are you doing?
A whale.
I have an MRI every other week. So is right now, there's still 5.5 inches of shadow over the front. So that all has.
And this is the color scheme.
But there was so it's gone down. That's great now. Good.
Being on map, I learned a lot, because we tutored under Carrie Watt, who was the premier land use planner for the state of California. He was our consultant, and we all learned a lot from her.
There's a direct
Basic education in a lot of fields, but,
really, yeah, dementia first, then moving into Alzheimer's. If you don't pay attention to the program,
that's why they get to
do everything.
Right.
Tell me what to do. Yeah. Half the building is on its way out.
then we're gonna break for dinner because it should be here.
Oh,
Okay, so we're just gonna have to roll with it. So, and Kaylee's not here, it says, Kaylee, please call the roll, but.
I will call,
Hillary?
I'll call the roll. Chair Joan Jones.
Here.
Vice Chair Jan Zabriskie is not present. Committee members Jan Holen,
Here?
Alicia Barr,
Here.
Travis Pribble, not here. Tim Rupert.
Here.
Corey Caldwell.
Here.
Jessica Penman, Stephanie Olivieri,
Here?
Pam Hopday.
Here.
Brian Wright, Richard Palante,
Here.
Jeff Manasco, Rolf Godon,
Here.
Lisa Wallace.
Here.
And Lindsay Romack.
Here.
And with that, I think we have a quorum, is that correct?
Yes.
Thank
Yes.
you. Now is the opportunity for members of the public to address the committee on items not on tonight's agenda. Please state your name for the record. Comments are limited to 3 minutes, and under state law, this committee cannot take action on the agenda. On any item not on the agenda, excuse me. Sure, you too fast, yeah. The committee may choose to acknowledge the comment or, where appropriate, answer a question or refer the matter to staff. Do we have any public comment? Yes, thanks.
I'd just like to begin today with a land acknowledgement. My name is Laura Saber. I begin today by acknowledging the Washoe people, indigenous custodians of the occupied land known as Truckee that we meet on today. Truckee and the surrounding area of Da'o-Aga is the ancestral and spiritual home to the Washoe, who have stewarded these lands for thousands of years and since the beginning of time. Our town, Truckee, and the surrounding area have been ancestral trade and meeting grounds for the Washoe, Martis, Maidu, Miwok, Paiute, Shoshone, and other indigenous peoples for many centuries before us. We recognize the descendants of these tribes and others who continue to share, steward, live, and work on this land with us. The Washoe have always been part of the land and environment and believe that land, language, and people are intrinsically intertwined. The Washoe have safeguarded these lands since the beginning of time. The earth, its terrain, its waters, all living and non-living things are sacred, and they request that you assist in preserving this ecosystem for future generations. We pay respect to the Washoe elders past, present, and emerging, and we extend that respect to all Indigenous Native American peoples here today.
Thank you, Laura.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
I'd just like to remind everybody Laura's on our subcommittee, and she brought that amazing tradition to our subcommittee. I'm so glad you shared it.
Very nice. Thank you.
With that, I did see the cart go to the back room, so if we go slowly, we will adjourn to the food. Allow them a few minutes to set up, and then we will come back and into tonight's agenda.
I have to move that slowly.
There's pizza from Rayleigh's.
Who's gonna go first?
I move slowly, so I'll just start.
Yes,
I'll
honey.
apologize, we had the chef ready for tonight like we normally have, but we had to, he mixed his dates up, so we had to run to Rayleigh's for pizza.
Oh, that's okay.
And they're out of their gluten-free.
Oh, that's okay.
Okay.
I'm only gluten intolerant, so it bothers me a little, but I'm not a.
I'll let you decide how much you wanna risk it.
I'm hungry, I'll just risk it a little bit.
Like, yeah.
When the doctor told me, I had a gluten intolerance, I go, oh my God. And so I stopped eating anything.
Yeah.
So when I had my next appointment, she said, you don't have to go.
You're like, I heard you.
Not 100%. I said, well, I've been going cold turkey. Once in a while, you
Yeah.
can add a little.
Yep.
Thank God.
I have a friend who's allergic to soy, and that's how she is.
Yeah.
She can have little soy sauce, but like if she has like Chinese food or something with tons of soy in it, the next day she feels horrible. Yeah.
Thank you.
We did not, I can tell you who has verified to me. That's great, look at him. He looks all grown up. The holiday one or the? Yeah, the one on, really?
He'll see me now.
So 2 events.
He sees me like, his eyes like.
Give me a second.
That's that whole beginning.
I apologize, I thought I invited you to both.
I've never been married. Looking for the right girl, like, the right girl, and then I knew.
If I
this-
didn't, I apologize. I'm just gonna add you to this right now.
10 years with her husband, and then her husband.
I feel like it's been a long time since I've been in here.
Super happy, healthy, athletic, and we just didn't want to go.
Exactly.
And so, he tried to get, he had his neck, he tried to.
Sure to get some pizza, Richard.
I always wait.
God, she probably appreciates that.
But it's, I mean, for now, it's- yeah.
I'm not that kind of spouse. I'm like, you're on your own, honey.
Exactly, figure it out.
Like Christmas, nothing really, my family's, you know, like a full house.
There's no one behind here.
Brothers, sisters.
I have, there's 6 of us.
Come
one
on.
brother and 5. Oh, really?
You guys.
All the iron. Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool. All my family has a lot of kids, so my sister,
Oh, yeah, it's kind of split. Choices, yeah. Got it.
I have a twin brother who has 3 kids. My brother's
What
2
kind
older than
of
me, he has 5.
She was
trying to caboose. My brother has 5.
No, I'm with you in doing
It's awesome.
Yeah, I need you to do it.
Yeah, that's a lot.
There's no.
That's a lot of money.
They come in waves. Mid-20s and then the, tweens, really, really young.
What's right? Yeah.
And, yeah, they're all gonna be very
Reinvest $100 million
immediate family.
going to a new
Cousin will be.
and gets us just starting it. So we're doing a good job. Most of them are now in
Educating
their
for-
20s. It'll happen.
Yeah.
So some years I'm sure, you get into it too much.
Yeah, you'll just.
3 or 4 weddings. Part of all just really we can work.
We joked, she survived that first
Yeah, we usually, you're on a 5-year permit.
Oh, wow.
We're already pretty tight, so we really don't have much more they could do to us. But we still have a lot of old changes and things we have to do, so we proactively, successful.
So yeah, so that was the,
But part of that, the state does it.
and it encourages with your six.
No sharing.
Yeah, no sharing.
So
yeah, so it's over now.
December for that, and then do the selection process for that. Right after the holiday. And then, you know, I think that will be wrapping up. I think so.
One of my nephews just started in Oregon.
Yeah.
I was just wondering, it's great.
Well, it's good.
It looks great. She's so good.
Our indirect,
Oh, yeah, wonderful. Where are they going now?
No,
I mean, I have a speaker as a little, I don't think they're going anywhere. She'll always come back. Yeah, but I love that she's. I'm so glad we did that. You do, yeah.
possibly do that.
That's right.
It was like everything else happened.
No later than
Oh, wow, okay. Congratulations. Thank you. Yes, thank you, Kaylee.
It's exciting, but also
Uh-huh.
There's a lot of stuff.
Yeah, no, you did great.
I've been pushing the pedal harder and
He got his Daisy stuff. He's
Right.
Well, I think what he did, he was trying to explain to me that he did
Yes.
Yeah. So he was like, oh, I'm just in my head, like I catered today, and then I cleaned dishes, and I just thought today was like a day of catering, not a whole day. I think he, but I felt really bad because he was so apologetic, so I was like, I'm just gonna do your end stuff.
Yeah, I'm gonna do things now.
He was very sweet.
state law stuff that we have to make sure we're in compliance. Crazy, but things to discuss. Exactly, before the end of the year.
Oh, that was
That'll be good.
This is time stamping for catering, in my opinion, too.
Totally,
It's
yeah.
hard to do it well,
I
and
feel like Thanksgiving being late this year, then now it's like, oh my
yeah,
gosh.
and like transferring to Christmas, and I love fish personally, but I just think
seem to take care of it.
I mean,
Thanksgiving now, so
that is true, because you don't wanna reheat it at work, so.
It was like starting early in the week. Started early and
Then we'll.
before Monday was dead.
Everyone's
Monday's like, oh.
We do a 2-year work plan, so this will start the year, our 3-year work plan. So I think that'll be exciting to have that conversation.
They stopped doing their group.
We just stay here.
It's okay, I'm glad you can have something.
Yes, I can eat it. Gone to Gravity House. It was your house. Where am I? Where was Gravity?
Yes.
Then you just have like a little inventory. My husband doesn't do anything crazy fancy.
Free doesn't taste to me that different. Done right. Yeah, this is You sell food.
I wasn't here for that.
last year,
Right, we know it's supposed to say.
Got it. Exactly.
Yeah, oh.
We have, yeah. It's not.
If you guys don't mind, I'm gonna eat and, work. So we're gonna go ahead and. You have water? So, item 5.0 is, the consent calendar. We have the October 10th Revitalization Steering Committee River Health and Access Action Team minutes. And, November 5th, 2024 minutes of this meeting. Would any member like to pull an item from consent? Staff? Public? Seeing none, I call for a motion.
I'll make a motion, we approve the consent calendar.
Second? Is that Stephanie? Did you second?
Yes, I do.
Well, thank you so much. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries. Presentations, staff, any updates?
June,
I'm sorry, yes, no?
our microphone's gonna,
Rory says that the microphones in the ceiling should be able to pick us up.
oh, those guys.
Yep,
Yeah.
yep.
We're gonna use our natural microphones as well. I'll try hard.
So when yawn goes like this, you know.
Yeah, when yawn's.
I need some signals, okay?
I need hearing aids, so, that's what my audiologist told me, so.
I'll pass over to Krista and Hillary if they have anything else, but just a reminder that Monday, the 9th, we have a, property owner reception at 5830 for anybody interested in, potentially filling out the Catalyst form and asking questions and coming to just, it's gonna be pretty casual. It's more of an opportunity to have one-on-one conversation with property owners, so, please, spread the word. We have distributed that out, so we think we've connected with all the property owners that we have.
If you know of a
contact.
property owner and you'd like to see a copy of that invite to pass along to them, just send me an email.
And then,
Oh, yeah.
immediately following that, in the same location, same night, we're gonna have a holiday reception for the committee members. As hopefully you can join us. We'll have, again, pretty casual appetizers and drinks, down at 5830, so we hope you can join us.
So,
And I'll
can
just
you-
add sorry.
Can you clarify, because I do have an invite for the R2SC celebration. I don't recall, I may have missed it, or it may have come
So
very
there's
recently.
two events on the same night. So we invited, not that we don't want everyone, but we didn't want to overwhelm the room with all of us and maybe a handful of property owners. So the Community Economic Vitality Action Team members were invited to our meet and greet for the property owners. I believe it's at 5 o'clock on Monday. And later that same night, everybody in this room was invited to the R2SC gathering.
But, Jan, you're saying you didn't get the invite for property owners?
Well, there's two property owners that I know of and sitting here, and I didn't get, I don't know if I got an invite, but I'd
Okay,
love to go.
I'll make sure you get one.
I got the invite.
Yeah.
Okay.
It might just be buried in your email.
I know. I-
For those who wear both
after the
hats, so
holidays.
make sure you have.
Yes, yes.
They just show up on my calendar usually.
And I believe Aaron also sent them to folks that he had done interviews with, so they might have that as well.
Oh, and I had one other update just to make sure everyone's on the same page. The RFI was published. It is out. If you know a property owner, if you're friendly with a property owner, you can just send them to townoftruckee.com or .gov/river. And right at the top is a big banner, and you click that and it gets you to the RFI. If anyone has questions, you can send them to that meet and greet. Like I said, I can send out the invite. And we're hoping to get all property owners to answer. Even if the answer is no, 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 I'm not interested. And we also, one other piece, I have a proclamation that Joan would like everybody to sign. This was town council recognizing the great work that this committee has done.
So my thought was if the committee members and action team members would sign it, then I will get copies made and everybody can have one for their.
Oh, that's nice. Where do you want it signed?
Around the border. Something creative.
You be you, Steph.
No kidding. And you can just lead us off.
I'm gonna lead this thing up. They are your pen.
Precedents, I know.
Any other updates? No. Great, thank you. We will move into discussion items. So we have the River Health Access Action Team revised memo. Stephanie is going to review this, and Lisa our chair is here for any questions.
Great, so, we weren't able to get to it last meeting, but the previous meeting, we had reviewed the memo. There were some comments given to the River Health and Access Action Team to be able to incorporate for consideration. What we're gonna review today are those changes that came forward after receiving comment from the committee, and want to understand from the committee if you feel like the updates and the revisions to the memo are appropriate, and then if the intent is that if they are, then the River Health and Access Action Team will pause for a bit until they have additional information to review from the action plan that comes forward, or from the work with the Catalyst sites. If there's feedback that they need to review, or design elements as part of this Catalyst site RFIs, they will reconvene at that time. So the few comments that had been generated as part of the discussion in the previous R2SC meeting had to do with a few nuances. Some of them were some clarification about some of the references. There was made reference to open space, parks, and managed access, and they were a little bit nebulous about what was meant within there. So within the revised memo, it was clarified that Managed access is a broader term, so it is encompassing in terms of thinking about the types of access, but that they want to be some kind of, thinking about being able to direct where that access is and being able to, use different strategies to be able to do that. Open space is referred to more of areas that might have river access or might have some kind of recreation element, but more of an open space, so passive, so not lawn, not a lot of built structures, a bit more of viewing passively the river. And then parks might have a little bit more development, but still not, in this terminology, not moving into, a lot of development in terms of fields and that type of thing. There was also references and clarifications that were requested around noxious weeds. We provided a definition. There was a few mapping changes that were provided, in particular extending the riparian corridor on the eastern portion of the corridor up along Trout Creek. So looking at similar the strategy along Donner Creek, that there's a riparian buffer and the opportunity to have trails through that area, that strategy also extends along Trout Creek. And then had some clarifications. There were questions about mitigation requirements, and if the recommendations as part of the memo were greater than the requirements that would be required through CEQA or not. So it was clarified that yes, they are. There was some clarification around access management and maintenance, and monitoring for that, and adaptive management, so that you try strategies, especially when you're thinking about managing access. If you're seeing an area of the river receiving a little bit more love, we'll say, or use than you might want, that there are a suite of strategies that would be applied to be able to help manage that access. In particular, thinking about more native or natural strategies, such as planting buffers and the like. There was some decision-making criteria that was added for managed access, in particular looking at areas of sensitive riparian nature, trying to use that as a term consistently throughout. And then the monitoring piece, again, as we think about adaptive management, that you're actually watching use areas and understanding how they're being used so that you can have strategies to address them. Lisa, would you add anything?
Just one thing, Stephanie, monitoring got a little bit confusing, same word used in two different ways. One is the way you just said, that we're tracking what's happening with the open space, the parks, and the managed access, but also monitoring that the decision-making criteria that's outlined in the memo is actually being used to make decisions about types of development, types and locations of access. So monitoring that the criteria is being used.
And Jan, you're on the action team as well. Any additional comments
I
you'd
think
like
you
to add?
did a good job in summarizing it. We could go into the weeds, but I think in November, the actual text was circulated in the packet. So it's not in this packet, but it's in.
It's in the previous packet, correct, yeah. Discussion?
On the question of monitoring, it's not river monitoring, like sediment loads, and, or would there be cause that we would ask for river monitoring?
Yeah, that's appropriately, I think Stephanie did not cover that this week, but in a previous iteration of the memo, there's a fair bit of discussion of that kind of monitoring, Joan, related to stormwater management, and it's outlined in the memo. So there are some requests for additional monitoring of water quality, both stormwater runoff, and additionally in-stream monitoring. Yeah. Third type of monitoring.
We do have in the slide deck later on, if anyone would like to see the maps, we do have those available, but those are, we don't need to, first thing we don't need to. Other questions, comments? Great, I would invite, we do have another action team member here, if you'd like to share anything. No, you're not on the spot, though, Peter.
The only thing in the agenda packet today that I was very pleased to see that all of our recommendations were in there, in the memo, so it's nice, it's great. Thank you.
Well done.
And I'd just personally like to thank the work of the committee, and the output was really, really tremendous, and quite a benefit to all of us. Lot of
So
work.
well done.
Yes.
Yeah, we had great support from staff and from Stephanie.
And we all learned something.
Stephanie,
I learned many things.
That's awesome. Great. We don't have to vote on anything there, okay.
Can we do
Next,
public comment?
oh, I'm sorry, thank you for that. That's good job. I would open for public comment on the report. Seeing none, I will close public comment. Thank you. We will move on to the receiver site subcommittee update. Stephanie.
I was gonna do it, but Steph said she was all
Oh.
prepared to do it as well. I'll chime in after she
Okay.
finishes.
We'll do the Steph show. So,
Yeah.
again, another subcommittee that's doing some excellent work. We have looked at, our first meeting was to look at what other areas in Truckee are either currently zoned industrial, or manufacturing is actually the correct zoning term for Truckee, or that with the land use designation with the 2440 land use might be changed in the future as the zoning code is updated to meet the land use designations for manufacturing, that those would get reflected. So this is one of those first sites. This is near Pioneer Center. The boundary in yellow, or the boundary in red, so if I'm just gonna go straight. So numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, there's a purple boundary line. That purple line is where this area is currently zoned manufacturing, so that's a current zone manufacturing district. The area that's highlighted is intended to, it's in the 2040 general plan, has a land use designation. So as the zoning code gets updated, that could get rezoned as manufacturing. It's currently zoned as residential. So the nuance here is that areas that are currently zoned as residential, if that gets changed to a non-residential use, there needs to be receiver sites for those units associated with that current zoning and residential. So although this would be a manufacturing designation, if zoning districts change to reflect the 2040 general plan, there would still need to be a little bit of maneuvering to be able to find receiver sites for the residential units of use. So those were cataloged. We looked at the opportunity for these sites, and the areas that are highlighted in pink are those as part of the conversation, sort of rose to the top of a mix of currently zoned areas that are currently zoned as manufacturing that might actually already have some development, so they might actually already have some structure in place to be able to have uses come into existing facilities, or that might be a lower lift in terms of being able to use those. So a few sites there that were looked at. I think as we look at the TDPUD property that's on the western side of this map, the piece there is that as that use, if that use moves, that's another sort of puzzle piece that would need to move, right? The TDPUD use would need to move to another location. That area that's zoned in residential would then have to find a receiver site for those uses, and then that could be used. This area also has some steeper slopes as well to consider, so could be an opportunity for some uses, but has some challenges for large areas that want flatter parcels. In general, it's about, I'll show you. There's, I think, about a 15% general slope through that area. So these are those areas that I just mentioned that sort of came to the top during the discussion as some opportunities, both with developed parcels that might be developed, and then also some current vacancies within Pioneer Center as well. I'll stop there. Anything to add?
Well, I would just say that looking at this, you probably note that some of these would be long-range opportunities. I think the special district obviously would be a long-range opportunity. Others, short range. We had talked to Cyril Mancuso, who attended our meetings, and some of the pink areas that are on Trails End, that are already zoned manufacturing and industrial are available, or could be easily available. So their short-term availability is very important for our work. And we talked earlier today about the need to meet state guidelines to move any residential zoning to another receiver site. So we do have receiver sites potentially at the river redevelopment areas, especially. So that gives us a lot of flexibility and current opportunity, which I think is real important.
The next areas that we looked at
I have a quick question
Yeah.
about, so in that previous slide, that Truckee Donner PUD property that's zoned residential, it was actually designated or identified in the 2040 general plan as industrial?
Correct, so that, yeah, so but it would need to, that change in zoning would need to be reflected as part of a zoning district update. So it's reflected in the general plan as a land use change designation, but the zoning currently hasn't changed.
I think just to clarify, Jan, it's not the PDO.
There is a portion.
Oh.
There is a portion actually that is.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah.
The lower section.
Yeah.
four
The
and
lower
five-
section,
4 and 5
yeah.
is
Okay.
PUD.
We won't call them. So the next area that we looked at, again, thinking about these pieces being moved, and maybe Richard, you could give an update as well, but currently TTSA is looking at, has done a look at their surplus land, so this reflects where there's land exchanges with the airports, and then also the opportunity areas that have been identified as potential surplus lands through that study. The enlargement on the next slide here, you can see those are those parcels that had been identified as surplus lands. The considerations here that have been shared is that the TTSA has expressed a preference that sites uses moving into this area would be other agencies, unless preference for uses that would have large outdoor storage. There's also been consideration and discussion about uses being located from one part of the river to another part of the river as well. But these lands do have favorable slopes for larger uses for outdoor storage, and there is adequate land that could be considered for screening as well. But I think the discussion from the group has also talked about that if this is something that the committee wants to move forward with, that this is also a need to connect with these boards as well to express the preference and the desire to have this considered as a receiver site because of the current preference for it to be a use for other agencies to use. Anything else?
Yeah, just that.
I'd like to, when you're done, Steph.
No, go ahead.
I'd like to ask Richard what you're thinking about this and what you're hearing from your board and observations.
Sure, so where we're at right now is developing basically a land use policy that will encompass any surplus land as well as what other uses that we would allow on TTSA-owned land. We're trying to kind of finalize the exchange with the airport before we move forward with that, so more to come after the first of the year.
Is it something that you guys would own? And
That's,
lease?
yeah, that's one of the talking points that the board's considering, whether it be sale or lease.
And I just a little more detail to that. I think Cyril Mancuso and someone else, I forget who else brought it up. I think was it you, Jack? Were you at that meeting? No.
I don't know
Maybe.
what you're.
Yes, he was at the most recent one.
Yeah. Talked about the concern with outdoor storage in the river corridor, moving it from one river corridor to another, and setting it back far enough on from the river on the slopes there, and how that could be developed with possibly it would be potentially a leased operation, but how it could be developed with temporary buildings and that could be removed and different types of buildings or different uses put in, industrial uses. So it wouldn't be anything permanent. And also that, Jack, I think you mentioned that you could share restroom, have one set of buildings that could be shared restrooms and shared office space, where the other would be industrial. And it sounded like a good possibility for this type of use if the DTSA decides to move forward with it. It's flexible. It isn't anything permanent in that property. So I thought that was really very intuitive and very smart on the part of Jack and Ciro to come up with that idea.
Any other questions here? I would describe, so the land exchange piece that Richard mentioned is just south of the right side of the map. So that parcel with the red line going to the south, that's where the land exchange would occur, which is outside of town property. So that's actually in county lands, not Truckee as well, which is another consideration.
Mm-hmm. And it's far enough back from the river. It's the piece farthest,
Yeah,
almost
it's
farthest
farthest
back.
from the river.
Mhm.
Are these 4 parcels in Truckee?
Those 4 parcels are in Truckee, so that the boundary to the south is
Okay.
the town line. And then finally, there is a parcel just close by, so this is across from Rayleigh's and Georgia Ranch. This area is also zoned as manufacturing, but it is within a planned area, so it has a whole nother set of guidelines to it, and development standards that would likely increase the cost of development within this zone. So we've kept it for consideration, but recognize that it might be cost prohibitive for uses to relocate from West River or East River to this location. Anything to add there, Steph?
No.
Is there currently I think at one point there was a development application on number 1, but is that on hold, or is that?
There's an entitled project that they're selling.
It was approved through Planning Commission and never developed yet, so they're selling it with the entitlement.
Oh, it's for sale?
Yes.
And is Area 2, is that part of the master plan development, or would that not have the same encumbrances?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'd have to double check.
Where? It's the airport property there. Area 2.
But it is TTSA, yeah,
Yeah.
or the airport.
It's the airport.
Yeah, not within the Georgia Range specific area.
Okay. So it may have more opportunities.
Yeah. Any other questions, comments on?
I have a process question. Super helpful to see this and get some detail. What, is the subcommittee still meeting? Are we gonna receive a set of recommendations? Like, what's the status of the work?
We have still been meeting. I think, the play with the receiver site also being able to work with Catalyst, like, because I think what bubbled up to the top of the discussion was this use of, smaller scale sites that might be ready, being able to work in tandem with those Catalyst sites would be, I think, the path forward, while still looking at some of the longer range pieces of what might need to.
What our subcommittee talked about is how important it is for property owners to look at flexibility, as much flexibility as we can give them.
I'm wondering about the comment, it came up in the context of TTSA land, but it strikes me it applies to the PUD as well, about hearing a clear statement of interest. So I'm wondering about that comment relative to the work of our steering committee. Like, when would we do that? How would we do that? Make a statement of interest.
And is it important to put it out to the boards of those agencies sooner than later when they are making decisions?
I think
Some in the near term.
Some in the near term?
that would be a good question for you, and how you think your board, what would be helpful for your board?
I think it would be helpful. I think all of them are aware that there's an interest and that this committee's meeting. So And I know you came and gave a presentation, so based on that, that's what everything is based on. It might be good to give a more up-to-date presentation to them so they understand what thoughts are coming up as far as sounds like storage, temporary type of use. It might be helpful for them to hear that.
Other questions? Otherwise.
Well, maybe, sorry,
Go
I feel like
ahead.
we don't quite have a bow.
Yeah.
We're gonna ask for a bow.
Yeah, I know, well,
I think maybe the bow, it's gonna be a glittery bow. I'll coordinate with Richard, and see if there's a time. We did a very formal presentation last time where we were on the agenda. There was an opportunity for the board to ask questions, so I'll work out the details with Richard if that's the approach, if it's something different from that, and if it is the approach, find a date, and then we'll report back.
And what do my committee members think about making that kind of presentation and statement of interest to the Truckee Donner PUD?
I think we have to talk to Brian.
Uh-huh.
Well, it seems that
First.
we should maybe make a blanket statement, like to all three boards. Yeah, all three boards, I was trying to think if there was
The
four.
airport too, yeah.
The airport,
Right.
the PUD and TPSA, just, the gratitude and the interest we have, and, from this committee, maybe in addition to a staff
And new
piece.
board members will be seated, so we need to wait for that. That will happen on the 6th.
That's probably, you're probably waiting for that to happen as well, no?
No, we don't have any new ones coming on.
Oh.
But definitely the TV.
Oh,
Yeah, and the new
has
boards will be
three.
seated in days,
Yeah.
really.
On the
It's not-
6th.
Yeah.
Sorry?
On the 6th.
Yeah, in days, yeah.
But they have to have some time to get oriented and.
Yeah, but I don't think a letter of support.
No, that would be fabulous.
Yeah.
I think, I agree.
And I think with the Catalyst projects coming forward, the three of them, we might want to look, have Ciro help us look a little more specifically at the sites that are at Pioneer Center that are readily available, so that our Catalyst projects don't get stalled if there is opportunity for relocation. So we might want to do that. I think he's out of town right now,
Yeah.
but if we could get him on the phone and our committee could chat with him a bit about that. So we have that in our tool belt.
And there was one vacant property that's off map, it's a little north.
And Ciro's, I think, got a, didn't he mention that he has a, he's trying to buy that,
Yeah.
and he's interested in developing it for industrial uses.
Will
So-
these agency lands be part of the conversation at the open house as a possibility? I mean, it'd be just from the perspective of like, is there interest? How much specific detail can we provide back to these boards based on that open house? Like, are these gonna be discussed in high-level possibilities?
I think, my only concern is getting ahead of the boards, right? Like, I don't want to be putting out there that, hey, like, we're hoping this is a possibility and
Putting words in their mouth?
Yeah,
That's fair.
I think as a concept of we are working towards finding receiver sites, if relocation is something that you're interested in for your property, we can certainly have that conversation, and have some maybe, boards with some QR codes that get us to the website and give all the information, that we've been working on, but we'll try to keep it at a level that's reasonable.
The way I've phrased it previously is that it's a potential opportunity. Not pigeonholing anybody, but
Right.
just saying like, because often people will say there's no land left.
Yeah.
Where would this be?
Yeah.
Are you gonna propose, if we were to write something for the boards, or are you gonna propose what, like, a lease opportunity or a purchase, or, for me, like, I'm super interested in this, I'd love to get off West River Street. And it's hard to find property that's available, it's really hard, especially for the size that we need. And I've talked to Brian, and he said that PUD's debating selling or downsizing their amount of property. But I guess I would say, like, not everybody's like us on West River Street. That's a tenant that wants to buy somewhere, but we are. But I would say there's a lot of guys that are little, they don't really want to get off of West River Street because they're happy there and they're not paying much rent. So if they go somewhere, they're gonna wanna go to something that's already kind of built out and relatively reasonably priced. And so I guess the incentive for me would be is like someone private would want to buy that property to develop it to get them into it. So it's either way, like if it's someone bigger like us, we'd wanna buy. And if it was smaller little mom and pop shops, they're gonna wanna move into something other than just a big vacant piece of land where they say, okay, Town of Truckee says, okay, well, if you wanna move here, that's fine, but minimum you gotta pave it, fence it, and do, you know, all these improvements that they're probably not gonna have the funds for unless they get. So to me, it seems like if it could be proposed in a way that, you know, is there an opportunity to purchase this land? I mean, that's how I would see it. That would be the most beneficial. Cause like Ciro's land is fine, but Ciro's not gonna sell it. I mean, he's a tenant, so he's gonna build it out, so he would be a good option for the smaller guys.
The build to
But
suit, he said he would
Yeah.
build to suit. And then, you know, Jack has a piece of property up there and several
Yeah.
other pieces that we could, that's why I think it's important for us to categorize, catalog who and
Yeah.
what their interests might be and how we could cross-reference these with the, starting with the three, but possibly
Right.
others that you talk to. So
Tim,
this is a
what-
real important
What you
piece.
just talked about, I'll piggyback on what Steph just said, is so important. Because all of the property owners that you know and that we all know, this is the big O, the opportunity for them to think big about what they would really like to do. And the more that fill out the application, where we can then, as a subcommittee, meet and begin exploring with staff and with Stephanie what those dreams are, then you can start taking receiver sites, opportunities, and approaching different developers or having developers approach us and do exactly what you were talking about in those receiver sites. But the first step is just what you said tonight. Thank you so much. It's so exciting. So we have to make this happen.
What, get me off West River?
That you wanna do that.
Everybody wants us off West River.
No, I'm not saying I want you off, but I just love hearing what you
Yeah.
want.
Maybe I can repeat what I thought I heard people asking for and see if it's in alignment with what y'all are thinking. So I think to finish timing, there's two different courses. One is us coordinating with our partner agencies on more of a presentation and update on where we're at and what we're doing. The other is a more official letter from the committee. And I was hearing, I think, that was more of a thank you for considering this and going down this path and discussion, and we would probably suggest as much flexibility and be open to that as possible. I wasn't sure we were gonna get into details of we like for sale and for lease options, just we support you having this conversation, and we'd like to see you continue it, that's what I was interpreting out of the conversation. So if it's different than that, it would be helpful to know, because I think we would draft that and get that back to you.
Are you good with that?
Yeah, that sounds.
Okay.
I personally think, like, I think that even if we were to do, which I suggested, which obviously, I don't know how much support there is in that, but like a swap of land on West River Street, like Greg Hendrickson, like if he got, say, for every acre he gave up on West River Street for trails or whatever, he got an acre and a quarter of prime real estate that he doesn't have to leave. He can either sell or he can develop it out for tenants. Like, that'd be a benefit for him. And then it's private, he does whatever he wants with it. And he wants the long-term rent is what he really wants. That's why he doesn't want to give up West River, because they have that income coming in.
Right.
And for us, like I don't want to lease. I don't want to go somewhere where I'm leasing for the rest of my life. So I just think that that would be
So
a
I think, I
the
took
key
that
to-
as an action item for our subcommittee, that we
Yes.
parse the opportunities in
Yes.
those categories. So it might not be
Yeah.
a letter, but it's in our work
Yeah.
with the subcommittee.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yep.
Does that help with the vote?
Do we need a
Is the
formal
vote-
motion?
Bill Purdy.
Do you?
We're in
Yeah,
business
I'm,
mode,
I'm
so-
good. I mean, to say too, I respect that we're balancing sending a letter that expresses an interest in it for the consideration, the time they're putting in, against, being perceived as overstepping our authority, right? Like it's a balance, right? So I really like the idea of the letter, a more general letter, because I think it is an opportunity to provide encouragement without overstepping. And then to echo what Pam said, for some of these ideas that Tim, that you have and others might have, like being willing to engage in the RFI process, that's a mechanism to actually, like, the example you just outlined is fairly complicated, but still, like, that's what the RFI, that's the complexity of that kind of idea can start to be addressed and teased out in that process.
And it's what developers see as sexy. That last idea.
Those are
So
interesting
there's all
ideas,
these,
yeah.
definitely.
Yeah.
It's a big old monopoly.
It is.
Yeah. But like, we have potentially have a mechanism for
Well,
monopoly.
what the really wonderful part is that we have so many at the table. We have so many people at the
Yes.
table talking. And that's a huge, and that's what I think is, I would want to show gratitude for, is that we have people willing to talk about it.
And the only other thing I would add is the collaborative nature, spirit of this group.
Yeah.
That it's not telling anyone.
Do you need any more formal?
So I think because of the holidays and board meetings, what we would do is draft that and bring it back to you for the next.
I think that's fine.
January meeting. And then we might
When's your
have-
meeting with the board, Richard?
The next meeting will be December 18th. We meet the third Wednesday of every month. So
Is this on the December 18th agenda?
I give them a update as part of my
Okay.
GM update,
Okay.
which I will probably share this with them now that there's, a little bit more formal discussion about the land that we have, and give them that heads up. So
Yeah.
perhaps January, February would be,
So if the letter came in January, that's fine?
yeah.
Okay. I just didn't want to miss an opportunity.
No, the ad hoc committee's kind of tabled everything until after the first of the year anyway,
Okay,
so.
great.
Internally, staff's working on some draft policy language for them to review when we reconvene after the first of the year.
Okay. Wonderful. Well, thank you for that great update, and I will open for public comment on this item. Seeing none, I'll close public comment. And we will move on to envisioned uses. Steph, you're still on hot seat.
I know. Well, I'm gonna trade off with the other stuff. I like that.
That was fun.
So this is a continuation of our conversation from the last meeting, where we have been, these last few meetings, thinking about, what uses might we anticipate? What are we envisioning for, in particular, West River Street? So if we, focus today just on West River Street as a continuation of our discussion. Want to walk through these. We do have a colleague from Denver as well to talk through an example, and then have some examples of different way to look at uses in terms of thinking about them from types of projects, and are these the types of uses or projects that are envisioned as well. So I want to walk through them, and then we can come back to talk both about, did we hear right in terms of some of the conversation last week, and then, what elements out of these uses do you think actually, do you want to see move forward as well? So some of the things that we heard, I think some of the consistency piece was about flexibility with some structure though, so you could actually achieve the vision that you want, because that's where some of the zoning development codes come in. The idea of, could there also be sub-districts, north of West River and south of West River are a little bit different, and maybe a little bit less focused on all the different uses that are in a development code. I completely appreciate that. The idea to encourage innovation, that this wants to be a new neighborhood, in particular thinking about multifamily housing, that it wants to complement downtown uses, the terminology maker spaces, small scale artistic was brought up. And then on the right side, there was also some areas where I think this is where there's the friction, right? Is there outdoor storage? Is there not outdoor storage? Could we have performance standards for outdoor storage? Should we just say no outdoor storage? Where do essential services go? That's been a common theme throughout our discussions, because we need them. And I think we all acknowledge, yes, Truckee does need our essential services. And that also relocation requires money for current both property owners and then also business owners. So we've gone through this exercise and hearing these common themes. And I appreciate that Lisa brought this up in our learning session earlier, that we've done these exercises in a couple of different ways. We started with looking at broad types of uses and where they might be thought about within the corridor, within these different focus areas that were brought forward within the River Revitalization Plan. Similar themes came up in terms of these types of uses resonate. There's ones that there's less support for. We did it with the chip game, so moving the little pieces in the groups around the table. Again, there were some commonalities that came up through that. There were some areas where there's still some discrepancies in terms of certain groups think maybe multifamily, maybe open space, or maybe mixed use. And then we did our last exercise, which was let's take the full development code list of uses and think about mixed use. What uses might be incorporated into mixed use? Again, out of 100 uses, if you took a step back, 80% of those uses, there was some pretty consistent feedback about what uses resonated, even with the complexity of the terminology. If you pulled them out into residential versus storage, there was some consensus or some commonalities in terms of some of the feedback. So with that in mind, we still want to continue to move forward and make sure we're hearing right, so we can pull together some recommendations of reflecting what we're hearing about what does that vision look like. And wanted to start off first with a quick example from Rhino. This is in Denver, and with us via Zoom we have Jim McCrae, who's from our Denver studio and does, I think his career has been in redevelopment and working with developers both through redevelopments of main streets, new properties as well, and thought Rhino has some commonalities in terms of, even though the scale is different, it's in Denver, it's also between a rail line and a river with a lot of outdoor uses. So Jim, I'll turn it over to you to just share a little bit about this before we move on to services.
Well, thanks, Stephanie. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay.
Yep.
Okay, great. Once again, Jim McRae, principal with the Design Workshop, urban designer. So I don't know if anybody's familiar with this project. It's known as the River North area, or RHINO as the acronym now is. RHINO is about 130 acres, so it's a fairly large, formerly industrial area that spanned two sides of our Platte River that runs along our kind of western boundary of downtown Denver. And about 2004, the city recognized that this area was really ripe for redevelopment. So they went about a community-based plan, not too different from what you're doing with Stephanie in our Tahoe studio, to try to envision how to transform industrial areas, light industrial distribution warehousing, into a new urban village. And with that plan that basically took about a year, spawned sort of an initiative, a kind of a grassroots initiative led by, in this particular case, two artists who resided in the area and actually had small gallery spaces. And they felt like this was an opportunity to kind of elevate art, to sell their work, but more importantly, to create what is known as now a creative district in the city and county of Denver. And so fast forwarding now 20 years, what has happened in this area has basically been full redevelopment to the point where it is known as an art district, and actually it is a nonprofit, 501c nonprofit organization that is really the orchestrator of everything that happens here, working closely with the city on what was put forward as a specific zoning overlay with a set of design standards that basically try to keep sort of the integrity, the grit, as people would say, of this industrial area, but to repurpose it in a manner that would enable artists of all sorts to have a home and to have businesses. So this really took a kind of a grassroots effort combined with the city and a lot of owners to kind of rally around this idea of how could we turn this into a creative area. And in fact, they did. And I think today's success, if you were to drive through here, you would be hard pressed to sort of see the sort of heritage of the industrial sites because they've all been repurposed as that image on the right, which is an old foundry building known as the Source, which is basically a market hall, combined with other, gas stations and other structures that were repurposed for, brew pubs and whatnot. This has all been done truly for the young class. So in Denver, not too different probably than Truckee or other areas, we are seeing an emergence of young professionals who need affordable housing and want kind of these environments. And so this really did cater to, the 25 to 35-year-old, give or take, resident and workforce. So now there is a nice complement of employment here, a nice complement of housing and a variety of, market rate rental and a little bit of for sale, mainly rental. But it has really progressed into this destination for Denver that no one ever thought would happen in basically an industrial zone, partly because it branded itself around art and the creative class, so to speak. So a lot to learn from this, both from a planning and zoning point of view, but also just in creating grassroots, kind of a organization that really spearheaded and drove a lot of what we see today through, community involvement, property owners, and really a facilitated process to see what we see today, which is quite phenomenal. And the transformation here in the economic development is, pretty much unparalleled, even in our city, which has been, pretty blessed by economic prosperity in the last 15 or 20 years. So I know a bit about it. I have not worked on the overall project. We have done individual projects within this district, but I'm happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Yeah, maybe for time, like 5-10 minutes, if people do have follow-up questions for Jim, since he is in a different time,
Okay.
so we'll let him
Okay.
go. But yeah, quick follow-up, John?
Yeah, I was wondering if there was any incentives that were put in place by the community, by Denver to make it happen, or the
Yes.
plan is one thing, but incentives is what we're curious about.
Absolutely. It started, the first incentive was creating what is in Colorado called a creative district, which is just a process to, apply and say that this district as envisioned is really about the creative arts, but it also is about community building and economic development. And through the state, which has legislated a pool of money, this district and 10 others in the state have been able to find capital to seed projects, whether that's to repurpose an old building, to set up an art program, an educational program, or sort of brand the project. So it started with that, and then it got formalized into now what is this 501c nonprofit organization that has set up both a business improvement district and a general improvement district, whereby they can, pool the money, the revenue that is now starting to be created, and sort of use that for public infrastructure, public realm improvements, marketing, branding, community building. So it started really though, the state stepped in, because they had this program, which really helped. And then the city, really, through their zoning overlay, tried to simplify the zoning codes and enable, some flexibility, because obviously that's key to redevelopment. And to just streamline the review and entitlement process, which, if you were in any other part of the city, could take the better part of a year, 2 years, of time and money. Here, it's a much more streamlined because it's a overlay district with its own sort of review board that is independent of kind of the city hall.
Interesting.
Please do have a question, Pam?
What were your top 2 or 3 largest challenges?
Well, inevitably it's, how do you kick this thing off the ground? And what comes first? Do you try to build public improvements, whether that's street improvements, transportation related improvements, or park? What ended up happening was it really was overcoming those big costly items that take time and energy, and really doing, kind of a bootstrap approach where these 2 artists in particular, and kind of this corral of artists that they banded together, they just started programming things. And so, I think it's always that challenge, right? How do you set up redevelopment without sort of having to mortgage your city coffers to, do big infrastructure projects when, the value isn't quite there. And so, it seems like in this project, and perhaps some of the others you're gonna look at, it's like, how do you find a simple, small project that, maybe you can fund through a state resource or a Fed resource, or maybe you have some money, and just start small and kind of initiate, a grassroots kind of community-built vision, which is what they did here. And, one thing led to another. That just sort of built some credibility. Then suddenly that attracted some real estate investors to say, yeah, maybe we could put some housing here. And so there was a developer by the name of Zeppelin that stepped in and did the first development. So it's, kind of a cause and effect issue. Infrastructure is probably the biggest problem. The zoning, it took a while to get that sorted out. I would say on behalf of the city, because I've heard this numerous times, since they weren't ahead of this enough from a zoning and a public infrastructure. They were behind it, so they were, more reactive, which at the end, they spent more money developing some of the infrastructure that was necessary, like re-improving streets that were, big 4-lane arterials, that were nothing for pedestrians. It was all about truck traffic and mobility. And I know from a park space, there was very little open space, even along our river. And that was all kind of reactionary. They kind of wish they had done some detailed, at least planning on park open space to really set the stage for this and understand how this growth would occur. So that was something I know that the city would tell you, people at the city who have been involved in this for 20 years would tell you.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Jim? If not, thank you, Jim. We'll let you head out.
Okay,
Thank
thanks,
you.
everyone. Have a good evening.
Yeah. So building on that, there are a number
Actually,
of.
sorry, just a quick thought on that last comment. In an ideal world, you plan all of that up front and stuff happens around it, but I also can't help but wonder that if they had spent that extra 2 years to plan, if the momentum would have died and nothing would happen, right? And so I just think it's easy to look back and say, oh, ideally we would have done this, but if you follow the ideal route, it might take 5 or 10 years instead of 2 or 3 years. And so I just think that's an important.
Where the momentum gets lost.
Yeah, I mean, they had momentum and to carry it, and I guess my thought is like we have momentum. If we overplan it, it won't happen. We'll lose the momentum and we'll lose the incentive, and it'll just kind of die on the vine. So just some thoughts.
Yeah, we have a 2005 river revitalization strategy. They started in 2004.
Yeah, right. It's a good comparison to, yeah.
They're bigger, they have more resources, but that's a sobering example of 20 years for where they are and where we are.
It really
Let's
is.
think about that.
Flexibility.
And they had a driving force, the artist.
Yeah. and small catalyst project, I heard him say too,
Yes.
which ties into our
Yeah.
RFI. and
Yes.
Get those
Exactly.
moving.
Anything else for Jim? Okay. So Danielle did a wonderful job too, I think, of building on this and thinking about, what might this vision, especially we're just thinking about West River Street, what might it look like? We've talked about uses, thinking about how things transition. So I'm gonna walk through a few projects, and Danielle, feel free to add in as we walk through. This is Santa Barbara, California, termed the Funk Zone. This is also about a 10-block area, also has a river associated with it, but integrates both industrial character and then also some commercial light industrial uses that you can see connecting in some of the adaptive reuse pieces. The next example is in Charlotte, North Carolina. This is a project building that you can see here, a mix of both office, retail, multifamily, and is an adaptive reuse of a building as well. It's an example of a mixed use project, and also again thinking about mix of uses with both multifamily and some industrial uses and commercial uses.
And just to give some context to why we ended up with all these photos is that after Jan Zabriskie had brought up the discussion about form-based codes, and then we did the presentation earlier, that's sort of how my mind thinks is, if we're ultimately gonna end up with different development standards or different zoning, sometimes the pictures and sort of the I like this, I don't like this help make that easier to come to terms with what that design would be. And I think part of it is visioning, and so a lot of these are very different than each other on purpose. Some are new builds, some are adaptive reuse, some are smaller scale, some are larger scale. And I think just for this group to kind of see what's happened in other cities with some similarities, but also just in that realm of opportunity of what we could consider. So I think it's, we're flipping through these, just kind of be thinking in your mind, like, yeah, that's something that resonates with me, or I could see that happening on West River, or no, that's not appropriate for these reasons. Like, kind of formulate that for yourself.
So I think, building on that, we'll go through them all, but then come back.
Yeah.
And ask you what you like or don't like. And all of this is, for those that were in the pre-meeting, the pre-workshop, will help us come back with what we think we've heard you say. So we're just trying to hear it in multiple different ways and give you multiple different chances to explain what you like and would like to see done.
Right, and it's in part because, yes, the development code has many definitions, which you have all kind of looked at, but there's so many nuances within that I felt like maybe that was too detailed. And so pulling back a little bit, I think will help us understand ultimately what uses are appropriate that aren't just the development code's definitions, because maybe we need new definitions, and so that will help us with that context.
Thank you. So this is Dallas, Texas, the manufacturing district, again, adaptive reuse from a warehouse to flex commercial industrial. This is an example of where uses, both commercial and industrial, and housing could potentially be added to a second floor, depending on that type of use underneath. This is San Antonio, a flex industrial park. Also an example of efficient use of industrial space that consolidates it into one area, where there's similar operational characteristics, but in one similar structure. This is Inglewood, Colorado. This is an auto shop that was repurposed to an urban farm, restaurant, and event space. Again, an example of how you can layer buildings, especially if you think about the scale of this in relationship to the uses surrounding. Oakland Avenue in Charlotte. This is a car dealership and another adaptive reuse to commercial. Again, thinking about how you might be able to rethink spaces and reuse those in just really different and new ways. This one's in Taiwan, reuse of a manufacturing plant. Again, an opportunity for adaptive reuse with banquet hall, market, bookshop, movie theater. It has a more interactive street fronts. It allows for additional uses in the buildings, 3 to 4 stories. Again, flex use as a use in Truckee that could be adapted here with potential residential. Rock Hill, South Carolina. This is the Thread project. This is adaptive reuse of a mill site to retail, restaurants, entertainment. sort of a creative office, a higher density project with a bit more emphasis on just the housing piece. In Athens, Georgia, reuse of a manufacturing plant. This has 130 residential units, commercial restaurants, also an indoor baseball training facility. Because that's where you guys are going. I hope that I can come visit. This is in Houston. A mix of mixed use, I'm out of my battery, so a mix of mixed use, retail, dining, and again, adaptive reuse of 5 previous storage buildings. Charlotte, North Carolina, this is smaller scale adaptive reuse, so a smaller building. You can see the before and afters there. And then this is an example that had been brought up at the last meeting as well. The thought about having some outdoor storage space, but what's fronting the streets and fronting to other residential uses might be a bit more attractive. The example in Design Outdoor in Reno, where they have a really nice demonstration garden that is the public facing piece, and then storage in the back. This can be described as the mullet concept, right? It's like very, very business, and then cutting one in and a little more fun. So
From the back.
So as Danielle and Jen said, I think what we want to hear today is out of those, and we can go back through some of them. What's appealing to you? What resonates with you in terms of what you could want to see? Anything you want to add to this,
Just one more
Danielle?
thing I think to think about too, is incentives have been a lot of the discussion that this group has had. And so there could be opportunities with certain properties where maybe they're still able to generate income off a portion of the property. They're keeping, a portion of it that's still being used for its existing purpose, but in the meantime, there's the ability to do something that's new that might look something like this. So there could be a hybrid in there too, where depending on the property owner, if they have concerns about completely, losing that income, maybe it's a transition. And so some of these projects kind of take that into consideration, that could be an incentive.
And we know the non-conforming uses is a piece, but that's something we're gonna table that for now as well. Thoughts? So first question, what items were attractive? What was appealing?
I have a framing question, and I think it relates to the fact that there's quite a small subset of us that were in the form-based discussion earlier. And is this basically what we like for the conversation of what might end up going into a form-based code? Is that our purpose here?
No, not necessarily in a form-based code, but as the vision for West River Street, regardless of what the administrative zoning ordinance would be, whether that, as a term we used before, Euclidean zoning or use-based or form-based.
Maybe if you go back to the first image and just take it one by one. Is there something you like in here? Is there something you strongly dislike that it would be quite fantastic?
Are we thinking of an overlay for this area?
If for now, if we could maybe not think about the administrative zoning piece of it, we can come back to that about how it might be, how it might come to be.
How it might come together?
Let's think about the what and we'll leave the how.
Right, because we can always come up with different rules, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the flexible part. That's the planner's job, to kind of take what they hear and put that into something that's, in the books. So I think the purpose of this more is about what that vision is. So kind of a almost higher level. So like things like outdoor dining or scale of buildings, or is repurposing buildings appropriate or not, or things like that you might see in some of these images.
Or that this is the Rhino example is that is an art district, right? It's very trying to gear into, we're really trying to bring it back. That is something it might not be. If there's a makerspace, yes.
As someone late to the party today, I love this idea of the art space, and I think when he mentioned that they have they got designated for that for Colorado. I mean, we're already designated as that for California, and I think there's an opportunity there that maybe we haven't really tapped yet. Of like, what could it mean to like have the cultural district, have the we have the historic downtown, and then the cultural district almost has more of a true home on West River as like an opportunity. I think there's an opportunity there.
Can you just be very specific? What are we already? For
Oh,
those who don't
sorry.
know.
Sorry, we are a California cultural district. We're Truckee. The whole town of Truckee is designated as a cultural district. So it was this is our second designation of it. There are 14 in the state. Nevada County is actually the only county that has 2. So Nevada County and Grass Valley are also a cultural district. This time it actually came with funding. So the town, the chamber, TDMA, and the Truckee Arts Alliance are partners in this. We hired Kelly Cutler as a program manager, and the whole point of a cultural district is to lift up your arts and culture and to use that as a way to drive economic development. So it could fit perfectly into something like this, and it's not really something I think that we've tapped as this group yet. And now I feel bad that we haven't talked about it yet, but we're talking about it now. So, and it is something that Hillary and I are the partners in that meeting, and we talk a lot about how do we get people to know that we are a cultural district and to value that, because it came with significant funding for the next 3 years, but we have to advocate to keep that funding at the state level. And this could be a project that I think could really show the state the power of being a cultural district.
Exciting.
Yeah.
I agree.
Obviously,
Yeah.
I worked on it.
So does that look like makerspace art?
It could look
Is that
at makerspace, it could look at culinary arts, it could look at a cultural center celebrating the Washoe. I mean, it really could look like anything. I think that would be a bigger conversation that we would need to start having at the cultural district level too. How could they fit into this and what that could really look like. But I think it could be really cool.
So that repurposing some of the buildings would fall into that or help with that?
Definitely. And I think, in a couple of these, there's the murals, on the repurposed buildings. Like, I think that would be a huge thing that we could do here. It's hard to do outdoor public art in the snow, but you can do murals in the snow,
Yeah.
so.
One of the phrases that he used to describe Rhino was maintaining the grit, and I
Yeah.
thought that really resonated with a lot of the discussions we've had, and I mean, that's part of our culture, right?
Yeah.
And so that could tie into, it's like as we repurpose and do some fun stuff, maintaining that grit, that authenticity.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I like about
Yeah,
this
this feels-
picture.
Yeah.
Is that
They don't feel
you
overly
know
polished.
that it was something before.
Yeah.
That there's
Yes.
history to it, that it wasn't erased, that there's context, and in a lot of the buildings, I like when you can see the prior use, that it was something, and now it's something new, but there's that tie to the
That
past.
legacy.
Are there
Yeah.
buildings, say on the West River corridor, that actually could be repurposed, or is it mostly stuff that needs to come down and make way for something
No, I
new?
think there are- I think
You know,
there's a
we don't
lot.
have those not big old brick.
Yeah.
Permanent.
Yeah, a lot of the adaptive reuse you see are old brick buildings, so I'll agree. But I think some of the things that came up through here were that there's a variety of building types, from airport hangars to mills that can be re-adapted. And I think West River Street has that.
Well, I just want to I put in my notes, lead with art. Obviously, we share an office with the cultural district over there at the lift, and, I can't wait to go talk to Kelly about, we've already talked about repurposing buildings to, a creative kitchen, entrepreneurial kitchen, things like that, but also an art space. We've had artists want that kind of thing. So I think that's huge. And to kind of piggyback or to answer the question about, those buildings can be repurposed. The reality as a property owner is it doesn't make sense to tear down even the junkiest buildings there, because the cost of reconstruction is so incredibly high. And honestly, the pound of flesh that you're going to get extracted out of you if you tear something down and rebuild it is really difficult to deal with, right? So if you can repurpose something, your fees and all kinds of other things that you wouldn't normally think of, you save. So just about any building that isn't literally about to fall over is likely to be repurposed.
I know we just flipped to the next, I appreciate that, and I think that's a lot of what I liked on some of these others is the repurposing. I did on the Rhino, He mentioned housing too, and multifamily, a lot of rental, the 25 to 35, like getting people who are living and activating spaces and being part of the community. And so I think I liked that about this area as well as some of the other ones as well.
Piggybacking on the 25 to 35-year-old, I mean, we have to deal with our workforce. We just have to. And this could be a great opportunity. And are we a designated business improvement district in Truckee?
We have the teeth.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, but I mean, that's something to explore, that's exciting. And I was reading about what San Francisco did after the earthquake in the 20s. And North Beach became quite a business improvement district. And many of the restaurants that were built then are still there.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, when you think about what this could mean as far as funding, extra funding, it'd be fun to look into that.
Just for sake of time, we'll keep moving. There's some really great examples in here. The funk, Santa Barbara.
Similar vibes
Yeah,
to
similar.
the.
The, I mean, garage door opening space, that's appealing in the, be able to use it as kind of outdoorish in the summer, but in the winter when we need more indoor spaces to still utilize that with the industrial feel.
Yeah, and Truckee Brewing is a great example of what a gas station can turn into.
Mountain Brew?
Mountain Brew, that's what it's, Mountain Brew, Truckee Brewing, I was thinking, but it's Mountain Brew. They almost have their tables. put
They're
together.
so close.
They're so close.
The Pass in Charlotte.
A little boxy. That's how I feel about it.
Well,
It's a little
to just
boxy.
start
But it
landscape,
started.
It's hard to vision that
Yeah.
here, right? 'Cause
It
it's
is.
such a different surrounding area.
Agreed.
It's a little
Yeah.
concrete.
But that's what they had, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
It still feels industrial.
It feels way too industrial.
Anything
Put
else
some
about
murals
that?
on it.
That way that pops out to you, to think about industrial, like parking around a building?
Yeah.
It's just a lot
And
of
the color,
flat,
that
bare
gray
space.
color feels very industrial.
No landscape, no landscape.
I like that. The top one that is,
With
the blue and white with the, I mean,
And the windows are cool.
it's pretty cool. Although, for some reason, I think it looks like a church.
Like a mega church.
It's
too.
Dallas, it's a manufacturing district.
I like the use of outdoor space in this one. It just feels very like open, communal, but still, again, not overly dressed up, like it just kind of fits the repurposing vibe.
I like the outdoor space that's covered, like the top picture on the right. Because you could still, I mean, it wasn't too cold, right? You could still use that in the winter.
Kind of reminds me of Andrew's new Truckee.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
A little bit.
The old lumberyard.
Yeah, the lumberyard.
Yeah.
The old lumberyard.
The lumberyard, the
Lumberyard.
the
I also
project is
like
similar.
that he said it would be easy to add housing to the second floor.
Anything else here? San Antonio, the Flex Industrial Park.
This feels like more what we might be trying to build somewhere else, to move potential people to, than building down there, right?
These are such big spaces to begin with, they don't, it's hard to correlate to what we're looking at, there's no buildings of this size.
But if you think about the AT&T building, like that's a big
That's true.
building.
Yeah,
Like,
That's true.
if the facade was improved, it could,
Like totally redesigned.
well, but I think, Jan's right, that,
Yeah.
it won't be torn down if there's structure that can be built
Right.
on.
It can be repurposed,
Yeah.
not just with this design.
Yeah.
For some things that, you guys might have said this, I stepped out for a minute, but for the things that are being newly built, I kind of like the idea that they look new. You know,
Yeah.
in addition, but like there can be an aesthetic where they still fit, but they look new. That's what this struck me as, these two examples.
Yeah, because if you're not careful, you start to look like Disneyland. Right?
Sorry?
If you're not careful, if you
Yeah.
try to make things look old that are new, you start to look like Disneyland.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah,
that's
Well, and I like,
Downtown,
things,
on the river.
things have a history, that something was built in the 50s, something was built in 2024.
right.
Yeah.
They should look like
They
that.
should look like that.
Right.
Yeah.
The auto shop repurposing.
I love that one.
Yeah,
me too.
this is
Yeah,
really
the
cool.
layering, I really like
Yeah,
the
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 layering.
mix of material,
Yeah,
The material, the layering.
it looks like more than one building.
A lot of these pictures have quite a bit of color in them. It's not necessarily the buildings, but like the murals or
The
the
finished
umbrellas,
work.
the finished work. It's, you know, a lot of them, it's colorful.
And you like that. I do, you like
Yes,
that.
yes.
I also think here, like, in a lot of them too, the signage is really prominent, street facing,
Yeah.
you know,
Lots of
It's very
opportunity for
energized.
yeah.
Yeah, that's what the
Yeah.
colors are.
Yeah,
Most
the
of
color
this-
and the signage make it feel very energized
Yeah.
and vibrant.
Most of this repurposing though is all to, looks like, art and restaurant
Yeah.
with housing. though.
Retail.
So is that,
This one, the greenhouse is
But
what you
does
see
that
popped
throw
up in
out-
the back. So where those tables and stuff are, that's the greenhouse that you can see in the very back image behind this, where it says Market.
Oh,
Yeah.
Oh, that's a
So that's
greenhouse.
the more industrial side of this project, is that it's got that layering of buildings, but the back building's actually the greenhouse.
Oh,
And they
okay.
also use it to have sort of overflow space for the restaurant, or they do, like culinary classes in there, things like that. But it's more of an industrial space.
But
yeah.
Tim, I don't
Yeah,
mean
I
to
think-
speak for you, but I noticed the same thing the first time we went through. There are not many essential services in these examples. It doesn't mean they couldn't be there, but they aren't there.
well, that's what I even think,
Yeah.
do we want to have like Travis's tire shop? Like, does that seem, to me, it seems like that can fit down there if it's in the right spot or, you
Right,
know, where
and
it's
say
at.
it was on the backside here, where,
Yeah.
you know, you can go get a coffee or a cafe while you're getting
Right.
your tires done. Yeah, pretty fun.
So there weren't examples of that
Yeah.
because there really aren't examples of that. And
Right.
not that we couldn't do that,
Exactly.
but I looked very hard to try and find that exact example. And this was maybe the closest where
You don't even get the sense of what's all around this property, but it did at least still retain some sort of
Yeah.
industrial
Yeah.
use as part of it. But a lot of times what happens is, these industrial spaces turn over into more office, retail, or, you know, specific uses like theater, you know, indoor field house, things like that. So it would definitely be different, but I think, maybe the Funk Zone had a little bit of that still, where, they still have the ability to like construct boats in their warehousing, so they call that still light industrial because that's part of the history of that space. But it's not quite configured the same, so it's just, there really aren't a lot of examples.
I think there's also the need to address parking as well, because it does require some area to put some cars, and when your cost of land increases and the value of that space is constricted, so I think that's why it's but not unsolvable, I think, at least as things transition through.
I think the next slide, maybe it's the next slide with the car place.
And a signage store,
There, yeah.
signage shop.
And I'm a little confused at what I'm looking at on the right.
So the right is the old building,
Okay,
and the left is what it turned into when they redid it.
Different facade.
So they added on to the facade and created that.
like I couldn't
They like
get
pulled it
there.
out, yeah.
Oh, okay.
So
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, the angle is different.
The
Yeah.
angle.
But there's no reason essential services couldn't fit into a lot of this.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, is that, I guess, you know, I think that's a really great comment, is that a
Yeah.
takeaway? Like, we want to fit essential services into
Yeah,
this.
yeah, so like I just actually read it another spot in Greg, and it's just an inside this big warehouse. I probably shouldn't tell the town this, I might probably have to pull up this. But, it's just it's chains, it's loader chains for tractors, and we're selling them. And, actually the town of Truckee's buying some. But it's just gonna be a retail, it's just gonna be a wholesale, you know, a truck will pull up and forklift will load a couple pallets of chains and then it's gone. It's not like it's accessed very much, and it'll only require maybe one parking spot. But to me, like, that kind of stuff seems like it could fit in, or, you know.
Yeah, I would say we don't want to
Some of the auto shop
preclude any of
stuff.
that, but to your point earlier, it does come down, it might end up coming down to like how much you can monetize what space is available to you. And some essential services might not be able to do that without, like, you know, Travis requires a lot of parking around there.
Right.
And if that's not available to him anymore, how does that change the economics of his footprint, right? And so like, I don't think we would want to preclude him from doing that, but I think there are other factors out of this committee's control that might end up driving some businesses to want to relocate based on that.
And if you're going to have, if we're gonna have neighborhood, we're gonna be focusing a lot of this on housing, multifamily and such. We're gonna have neighborhood services, maybe daycare, all the things that go with neighborhoods, you know, small shops, little grocery store, simple little grocery store with a restaurant attached, something like that. So those kind of, they
I was
become
just in
essential
the,
services too.
Redeveloped area of San Francisco that's near Oracle Ballpark. They've just,
Mhm.
that
Oh, yeah.
whole area, they've just redone. And it is filled with gyms.
Mhm.
Like, the one thing that there's more of than anything, and so who lives there? 25 to 35-year-olds who get off work and go to the gym.
Hey.
That much I know.
We have 50-year-olds going to the gym.
Okay, that too.
Is there,
On the what?
Gym slash workout and then drink.
What did you say?
Oh, there's consensus by the group, I'm just making sure.
On
I believe
what?
So, on neighborhood services, daycare, small
Oh, thank you.
grocery, yeah.
I was just thinking about the kind of integration of industrial, artistic, like a welding shop that, you know, that you can go get something welded if you need something welded, and yet, and they also could be doing like Steinheiner up there, or even at like a glazier, glass shop, that's doing some kind of industrial type glazing, and yet I can go there and I need a new piece of glass for my window I just broke, and they can cut me a piece of glass.
Some manufacturing,
So some kind of a-
mix of their thoughts from the group on these types of uses as well. Again, there's a piece, and this is where sort of the zoning piece comes in, of trying to understand where noises and odors might come from certain types of uses, so that residential uses aren't impacted. Otherwise, Jim's phone rings off the hook 24/7 of what's my neighbor doing? So there's some benefit in helping understand it. It's not to say it's not doable, but there's just considerations to that. So thoughts for uses like welding, some manufacturing pieces coming through?
I'm not wild about it, personally.
There's some considerations there.
You know, for me, this is one of the things that's kind of murky, like, what's the difference exactly between a makerspace and a glazier? Like, that's like a little confusing, right? And so it maybe comes with, I forget the vocabulary that you use, but I don't know, sideboards.
There's some, sideboards, there's some standards. I think that's
Standards,
where,
yeah.
you know, if we understand, if, you know, the town understands, hey, we'd like to figure out how this could work, but we recognize there's some challenges, and that's where you get into the 10 classifications of a welding shop. This welding shop might actually work, but some won't. So I think that's where you get into some of the piece.
Yeah, I mean, I think we keep talking about flexibility, and the people that are trying to develop, the property owners, even the business owners, they're all saying, hey, we need flexibility, and we've had these, I'm really worried about when people are like, no, I don't know about welding shops. I'm like, you know, our property, we have 3 welding shops on there, right? And granted, in the long run, I'd love not to see those relocated somewhere else. But if we create a situation where until we get rid of those welding shops, we can't do anything, we've got a problem. And, you know, so that's where, you know, figuring out, like, the non-conforming zoning thing that we've got going on here is really restrictive. I can't even put metal on the side of my buildings because they're they're non-conforming, right? So, this is.
I think that is a huge topic that we're gonna have to take on as a group. Like, we're gonna have to have a meeting about non-conforming. Like,
Yeah, that's
I
gonna be a whole-
I agree with you, it's an
Agreed.
issue. I think, we're not talking about getting rid of any existing businesses currently. We're talking about, in the future, do we want to continue having those businesses? And I agree with you, it's a tough question and flexibility. And I think, you know, what ends up, what the rules end up, then they go back to staff, and staff, when they have the applicant come in, they go to those rules. And if it's not in those rules, it doesn't happen, and that's what I think we all want to kind of avoid, is like the good project that goes away.
Well, we want compatibility too, so you don't want to, as we talked earlier,
Yeah.
about having housing and then you have not a non-compatible use showing up or.
And, you know, but maybe there's areas that we designate for different types of uses, so that we can have
Yeah.
more flexibility in the spaces.
And I think the market's gonna dictate a lot of how this develops.
Yes.
A lot of how it's gonna
Absolutely agree.
Or it doesn't.
And we need to let it.
Or it doesn't.
We have a few
Yes.
more, and I think,
And let that happen.
to Jen's point, I think she rightly highlighted this one as like, let's table this one, and it's one of the great topics that we're gonna have to dive into. The manufacturing plant adaptive reuse, into banquet hall, markets, has interactive street fronts, pieces of this that are attractive.
Conceptually, I think it's great. I mean, we don't have anything, I don't think that's 300 meters long.
It also feels a little bit like
This
the
is
old
one of the
lumberyard
first
stuff, right?
examples.
Like what they're trying to do there. But-
This is one of the first examples we have of housing, and I know there's some on the next slide too. But I think the important thing to recognize is that if we want housing, and, you know, we're gonna need to go vertical, right? And a lot of the earlier slides were, you know, basically industrial, single-story, maybe 1.5, 2-story things that have been converted. But if we want housing, you know, we're gonna need to go up, or a reasonable density of housing.
If we look at opportunities of design, piggybacking on what John's saying, flexible space is really important. Where it can be creative and innovative, but
It's hard to think of 3 or 4 stories on the south side of West River Street. Maybe the north side of West River Street. It is, so point taken, right? Like somehow we gotta have housing, but it is hard to think about 3 and 4 stories on the riverside.
But even 2 stories gets you, I mean, in a lot of cases, you can have housings on that second story.
yes.
And some of that could be articulation, like we saw with some, that it steps back, there's wasting mass, and something that doesn't.
It seemed like some of the repurposing could be, well, this is what you're talking about going up, there's a lot of the buildings there are 1-story buildings that I could imagine one could go up above those, but the second, third story, whatever it would be, is not structurally part of what's underneath it. That it be, I like to think of the Save Mart Plaza there, that you could build second story housing, whatever, above that, that's kind of on stilts or however.
I'd have to ask my contractor friends about the cost effectiveness of, but possible. Yeah. Just, I felt like I missed something.
I don't remember. Oh, I was just saying that this is similar to that other project that's happening that we were talking about, the old lumberyard. It feels active streetscape, active, yeah, what they're trying to do there.
Yeah. The thread in South Carolina. I did see residential, this is more emphasis on housing
very motel.
Yeah.
looking.
So the
Yeah.
form.
That's the vibe I got.
That's how I
Housing, but
felt,
not-
yeah, right?
I think
Yeah.
it's good to leave some comments
We
about
thought we
that,
could put
so.
Motel 6 on that one.
I know.
Yeah, I mean, you're not proposing that the bottom picture literally, I know, but, you know, there'd be riots if we proposed that.
Exactly. Exactly.
But people would be engaged.
Other thoughts on this image?
Not so much the image, but I like the term creative office. I feel like that's, especially if you're looking at a cultural district and things like that, that's an interesting way to engage and incorporate other uses.
Have you guys ever been to the old post office in Reno?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's pretty sick. And there's like a bike repair, e-bike repair place in it. It's like
Yeah.
you go into a basement area, there's these little shops. And then there's just office space, like 2 or 3 stories, and it's all old looking and remodeled. It's awesome. It looks really cool.
And it is a good.
That's
I
the one
mean,
though, West Elm is in that building.
It's a good mix. I mean, there's maybe not essential services in there, but it isn't only restaurants and retail.
Yeah,
It's
no,
more
it's
than
got
restaurants and retail, yeah.
all kinds of cool stuff.
Yeah.
But it's kinda like, it's like,
The Wire Park. Adaptive reuse of manufacturing with residential, restaurant, and a baseball playing facility.
Love that.
What would the snow load be like?
yeah.
I
We
like
have
the
two great
metal structure, exposed metal structure.
I like that. I like the indoor
Yeah, I like
outdoor
that feel.
feel of it.
Yeah.
If, you know, thinking about the indoor baseball facility, when you mentioned, Joan, the AT&T building, like I could see something like that, maybe not baseball here, but maybe it's pickleball courts or something with a bar, you know, and it's indoor.
Yeah. That's a big building.
Yeah.
It is.
For car storage.
It just disappears if you don't pay attention to it.
I know, it's true, like, until you like think about it.
Wouldn't be allowed car storage.
Yeah.
Houston, this was an adaptive reuse of storage buildings. Creative retail, dining, office, very low scale, most fun buildings.
I like the like the look of the building, just how it's kind of unique. That fits into if that was in a creative area, whatever that is at the top, I don't even know.
Outdoor park.
Yeah, I'm not
Just
sure what
the
I think
facade.
about the design on the top.
I'm not sure about the.
I don't know if it's exactly, yeah, but that it's a
I
little
like the
unique.
articulation element.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I wouldn't like snow load, but.
Yeah.
no.
It's hard to tell from this photo, but I have a feeling that feels like its own thing, right? Like it feels like its own little outdoor mall or little like shopping
Yeah.
center
Like
piece.
self-contained
Self-contained, which I kind of like for parts of what we're trying to do. I think there are areas that could really work.
Yeah.
Is there
Yeah.
still no zoning in Texas?
It's pretty minimal. It's more prevalent in cities, but definitely not in the rural areas.
I think they had their first general plan like 5 years ago.
Yeah. It's crazy.
Definitely get the weird mixes of like daycare next to bar and things like that.
Strip clubs.
I think something as the group's been talking about this too, I was just in San Francisco this weekend, which made me think about, they've done a really good job in integrating new urban parks, including like a dog park near City Hall. When I say it's urban, it's all like AstroTurf, but it has like things for the dogs to play on and things like that. And I know that in Truckee, it's been sort of an ongoing discussion of, we don't have sort of that integration necessarily of like, more urban uses like that, but this could be, if this becomes, a neighborhood area, places where you could have these more formalized spaces, getting your car repaired, you could play with your dog in a small urban dog park or something like that. So I think there's other uses too that, again, we haven't thought about that could be appropriate in this area that would add to the character of what it is, especially if we're talking about bringing in more housing for people, whatever their age is, I don't think it matters. It's, what are they doing while they're there? And if indoor-outdoor spaces are sort of an important component of that, we can think in those terms too of what that looks like, something that's just different than what we have in other places in Truckee.
Feelings on that? resonate?
And again, I think that's gonna be one of those market-driven things that once it kicks off, then some, entrepreneur's gonna see an opportunity and be like, oh, this is a great place to invest and put in X, which we never thought of, and it just kind of organically
Yeah,
goes from there.
that's exactly what's gonna happen.
Where did we
Yeah.
go wrong with the artist loft? What
Oh,
didn't
let's
kick,
not
what
go
didn't
back
kick
there.
it off there?
Let's table that one in our last.
Yeah.
Let's go, that's a personal knowledge.
Squirrel.
Charlotte, so small scale adaptation.
I feel like it's just a really good example of what we can't envision. Like, I can't look at that top picture and see see the bottom one, but someone else can.
And
So-
really all they did was give it a coat of paint and then put an awning around
Yeah.
it and planters,
Yeah.
right? Like, it
Yep.
doesn't take a
That
ton
much.
if you have the vision, which I wouldn't have either.
Yeah, like I couldn't
Screens,
do
all
that,
the
but
Stuff on the top of the roof.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, yeah.
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 Put a
It's like
screen
really
around the
quite
air
simple.
conditioning unit.
And then, stone yards, so again, something aesthetic in front, but ability to have some
I
outdoor.
don't know that I wanna
storage
encourage
spaces.
mullets coming back.
They're already back.
I think they can, they are back.
They're back.
That's not a mall.
No, mullets.
Mullets,
Yeah.
oh, yes. There are already back.
I think it's important for us to think about, places where things like this could happen, so that way, if there are, again, essential services or uses that want to stay, that could make sense, screened in a way, or, it's not street facing.
And, I mean, we also have a railroad that would be lovely if we screened it a little bit in some places, right? That isn't controversial, I don't think, to say that we don't want to just stare at the, like, something like this with that would be really nice too.
I think it's gonna be really important for the town, you guys and Stephanie, to really think about where residential's gonna be and what people living there with children are going to be around and feel and see. It's really
Exactly.
important
Exactly.
what screens are used for when we think about integrating housing, especially to be profitable.
But they butt up to each other all over this town.
Yeah,
And they do it successfully.
And I think there's also an element of the visual connection of downtown to West River. Like, you don't wanna screen the railroad there. You want that connection and that
connection, yeah.
authenticity of the
Exactly.
transit hub right in the middle of town.
Yeah.
I think like
Yes.
over screening the railroad is a slippery slope.
Yeah.
This weekend, I watched people lining up along the parking lot to watch the train go by.
I know.
No.
And their kids
They
waiting.
take pictures.
Unbelievable.
They love
You're like,
it.
is there
Every
a
day.
railroad before?
Every day.
Every day.
They just love it.
Yeah.
This slide reminds me of, as other people have said, the reality that some of these uses are gonna be here for a while. I mean, we may want them all to move in the next few years, but that's not gonna happen. So the screening and but just being accommodating of the properties evolving over time, because like other people have said, the market's gonna drive it. But I think the other thing that I'm just gonna keep bringing back is that we're talking about a lot of different parts of this West River. I mean, what's up against the tracks is very different from what's right up against the river. And even on the south side of West River Street, there's also, I mean, Truckee Rents is there. Do we want Truckee Rents to go out? I mean, honestly, if I were to live on the property that we manage, I would love if Truckee Rents stayed there, because then I don't need to have as many tools. So I guess my point is that we keep thinking about this as one monolithic zoning, but if we're talking about what's appropriate, we need to be really much more specific.
But also, if Truckee Reds had the opportunity to have a storefront or something that faced the street, like maybe they would also be able to diversify what they're offering. So right now, they have a lot more kind of construction, tools type stuff, but what if it became a separate wing of it where they wanted to have like strollers or things for, people who are on vacation or other things that they haven't even contemplated yet? I mean, I think part of it's because they're so hidden away, not everyone, thinks of that right off the bat, and so that's a space that at the end of the day, it may not be, if you ask them, their ultimate space where they want to be too. So I think there's also opportunities with the businesses to
Yeah.
have those conversations about, like, what is useful for you and the space that you have, what would you do different if you could start over with your space?
Well, these have all been really great, and I think it's also great timing as we move into catalyst projects too, to think about how these could take shape and form and place within different opportunity areas as well. So, we're gonna go to public comment, I believe. I'm gonna wrap up,
Yes.
but congrats, we got through
I
this
know.
entire agenda.
Congrats to you. Very well done.
Do we all clap? I'd like to open for public comment. Yeah, sure. Good.
Jack Husman. I've listened to this, and there's just a ton of moving parts here for you folks to consider, for everybody. But I look at it from a different view, from the standpoint of if you make capital investment in some of these projects, what is your return? Who's my customer base now that I've changed my facility from whatever it is, and I've gotten a coffee shop, I've gotten a donut shop, I've got a laundry or whatever. Where do my customers come from that are gonna support those tenants that I have, that I've made the capital investment that they have to pay for? And that's a real tough question when you're asking everybody to make changes and go on. And what's the build out on the houses here? What's the population base? Once we get to a certain point, what can our population base and the people that are in town, how many restaurants can they support? How many coffee shops can they support? Because if I opened up a coffee shop tomorrow, I don't bring new customers. I take from somebody else. One of my existing competitors, I'm going to take a certain percentage from them. So that makes them less viable when they want to hire another staff member, expand their business, have a better lifestyle. So once we get to a point that we're doing a lot of these things, we may be saturating the marketplace for the population that we have here. And the reason I only point this out is only from a business standpoint, that our population here can only support so much. Then we have to deal with the tourist. So the tourist base comes, but they also go. So with the economy, that's a fluctuation wave. But you still have to have that base that can support you through the year. The other one's an extra. And so it's really a tough thing if we incorporate too many of the same things. And if this gentleman mentioned something about a glass shop, how many panes of glass do you want to buy to support that shop? So when we get to certain things, we're talking about how many local people can patronize that specific business to make them viable. And that's a real tough question. And we're looking to the future, and so I can't tell you, nobody crystal ball that, but we're talking about affordable housing. If you're talking about affordable housing, you're talking about businesses, you're talking about where those tenants, can they work at another new coffee shop, donut shop, clothing store, whatever. How many can we support? And that's really tough. To go back to Tim's question on the relocations, I'm with him. I wouldn't build on lease rent. I mean, that's just out of the question. If you're not the owner, you're just a resident, and that's not good to put capital in. But that's just my comment. I mean, I just look at it from a different view, and I think everybody's very compassionate about what we're doing here, and I'll go along with you. There's some great ideas here. I'm just looking at maybe a little different from the reality side for me, and only my opinion. And I thank you for your time.
Any other public comment?
I just wanted to reflect back on a lot of what I've heard. It was a really energizing conversation tonight, so thank you all. And thank also to many of the folks, Danielle, town staff, who just put together a really comprehensive presentation. To me, the kind of variety of inspiration was really energized and vibrant. I love the grittiness, the authenticity of balance. And for us, we have a really important balance to strike between our history and also the innovation and what's to come next. Some kind of recommendations for other sources of inspiration. Look to one of our neighbors, Gross Valley. I'm glad to hear it's also a cultural district. I was there recently and really inspired by a lot of what they're doing locally in their town. Also, Guardbridge Paper Mill in Scotland, of all places, near St. Andrews, was converted a paper mill into affordable housing for graduate students. Zermatt, Switzerland, they have a train. They don't allow cars. That's controversial, but I'll say it without loud words. And also a beautiful ski town that has traversed over the last 50 years throughout a really incredible arc of in creating a local economy that thrives, but also supporting a lot of tourists. Steamboat Springs in Colorado, along a river, historic town. They have incredible transit and invest a lot in their historical preservation. Shoreditch and East London over the last 20 years have done a lot of development. Three particular projects I would point out. One in East London, a rail yard project that I think may have had an example of some of the essential services and mixed use, where they actually got the underweight arches of rail yards and repurposed them all along the rail corridor. A box park, a mixed use commercial and retail park, leveraging low cost containers to build them really quickly. Also an example of kind of temporary building and innovative uses. And then also in Shoreditch, it's referred to as Silicon Roundabout. It's where London actually kind of created and developed an incredibly thriving entrepreneurial ecosystem. And that's something that could certainly happen, borrowing and lending from a lot of the values derived out of San Francisco and taking that into East London. And you're now seeing a lot of that happen throughout the US. Look to Austin, look to these small towns across the Midwest that are really starting to drive a lot of growth, investment, capital, businesses by supporting the ability for these businesses to be founded. And what better place than to live and work in Truckee. And then also places like Bushwick in New York City, kind of mixed use arts and industrial uses there. That's a kind of smattering of, as I was listening and looking at these, of the places that I thought we could draw some inspiration from. But a few kind of final takeaways and themes that emerged from just from all of what I was hearing from tonight. I think it's really important for us to think carefully about neighborhood and housing creation. And developing new opportunities for folks to live affordably, to raise their families here, to stay around for generations. Art and community development, adaptive reuse. We have a lot that could be transformed with a lick of paint and a tool belt and a vision, and maybe some fixing of the non-conforming stuff, but we'll table that. And also the entrepreneurial and economic innovation, flexibility and future-proofing, incentives and zoning. And finally, I think it's a real great opportunity for us to leverage the cultural district designation to our advantage, and we should do so while we have it. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any other public comment?
I will add on to that just real briefly. This picture of the stone yard, I think in Truckee, the Rock Garden is an example similar to that. Their showroom is out front, kind of. It's never really taken off, but anyway, and their industrial pick up the stone and everything is in the back. And then real quickly, everybody really liked that mural in Denver, the 2-story mural. We tried to do that in Truckee at the Art House, but it was kind of in the wrong spot, right as you drive into downtown, and we don't allow 2 stories of blank wall, even though there was gonna be a really cool, very pricey mural on the outside of it. So every one of these things has to have its own space. You know, a mural could work at some places, not all. So, thank you.
Thank you. Great. With that, I'll close public comment, and we will move on to committee member updates. Anyone have any updates?
I have one.
Okay, good
Always.
job.
So the reason I wasn't here the whole time today is we launched yesterday in partnership with Sierra Business Council our Futurepreneurs Entrepreneurship Boot Camp Week, which we have 20 high school students that are creating 6 different theoretical businesses, although some of them are definitely viable in our community. And on Friday, we have our pitch showcase, which is open to the public from 5 to 7 here. All of them will pitch with their pitch deck. They're working with mentors. We have 3 judges, and there's a cash prize. And we would love for the room to be full for these students. So they're working really hard. It's really fun to see. So that's my pitch.
Where's it gonna be?
It'll be in this room.
At 5.
5 o'clock. 5 to 7 o'clock on Friday. Unfortunately, it will not be recorded this year, but we'll work on that for the future.
One of the mentors, after working with them for 2 days, he's one of the donors for those prizes. He actually upped his prize amount after seeing these kids working.
Oh, that's so
It's really cool.
great.
It's
Congratulations.
and everybody came back on the second night, which
Yeah, that was awesome. Including all the mentors, like everyone was there.
That is great.
Yeah.
It's awesome. Yeah, it's really cool.
Will it be recorded?
No.
Oh.
We didn't think about that till yesterday, so.
No worries,
Too
I
late.
just had to ask. I was watching recordings of things.
We also wanted people here.
Yes.
We wanted people in the room.
Come in person.
Yeah, in person, 5 to 7. That's it, that's all my updates.
Okay. Anything else? Corey, don't you have something?
I don't want to piggyback over the top of hers, but we are doing the next 3 Fridays. We have Festive Fridays in historic downtown. If anybody wants to come out, we'll be doing a sip and shop, a scavenger hunt. We're just really encouraging everybody to try to come out and support the local businesses on these very slow times of the season. So there's going to be a lot of fun activities coming out if you guys want to come out. That's going to be the next 3 Fridays from 4 to 7 o'clock in historic downtown.
Nice. Start there.
Festive Friday.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you could go early and then go to the
Yes.
Futurepreneurs afterwards.
That's great.
Don't sip too much.
Well, thank you all for a great meeting. At this time, I will adjourn to our next meeting on January 7th, 2025. Wow.